He was just a wonderful person. He was so funny and so charming.
Enjoying his retirement years.
At that point in his life, he was very content. He was very close to his family, his nieces and nephews.
Is brutally gunned down a month before his wedding.
It was point-blank assassination.
There's a big puddle of blood. Oh, my God!
Investigators pieced together a series of clues.
We had to look at what role that upcoming wedding had and what happened.
They'd have their arguments. They had their differences.
Was the scene staged to cover up an intentional killing? The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
And chased down multiple suspects.
It was a whodunit. We were hoping for that break to come.
Revealing a plot fueled by greed.
He was somebody who had had a criminal history of theft and assault.
Just when police are close to making an arrest,
it was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat.
They uncovered damning evidence pointing to a surprising suspect.
You never expect anything like this.
And then all of a sudden, the kill was right in front of us.
On a warm July afternoon in 2014, the sleepy Pittsburgh suburb of Kennedy Township is rocked by a panicked call to 911.
What's going on?
I just come home from work, and my husband, he's been on the ground. He's dead. There's a big puddle of blood.
Police, fire, and ambulance are coming, okay?
Oh, my God!
The woman who made the 911 call, Carol Lapaya, says the victim is her soon-to-be husband, 59-year-old Jack Parks.
When I arrived on scene, the first thing I noticed is that the victim's head was covered in blood. It was on closer examination that you could see it was a gunshot wound. One challenge we had right out of the gate was that there was no casing for gun found. We don't move his body until it can be photographed. It was possible there was a gun underneath him that no one had seen, so we weren't 100% sure if the gunshot wound at that point had been self-inflicted or a homicide. We looked for a while. Unfortunately, we didn't find any type of gun.
Detectives searched for any signs of what happened to Jack and who pulled the trigger.
It was pretty clear right off the bat that this was some type of a home invasion or robbery that occurred.
It didn't look like a struggle had ensued in the room, but once you walked through the victim's house, the further you got into it, the more you realized the level of disarray it was in. And as you went into the dining room, you started to see jewelry box here, a drawer gone through here, papers rifled through. Upstairs, there was just complete disarray. The drawers were all pulled out. The clothing that was inside the drawers was strewn everywhere. Jewelry boxes flipped open, empty watch boxes laying there.
We were trying to determine, was the scene staged? Was someone just trying to make it look like a robbery or a burglary? And when in fact, they're just trying to cover up an intentional killing where they intended just to walk in and execute somebody. The house was dusted and processed for DNA and fingerprints. We then began to process the outside of the residence, looking for any type of forced entry, and none of that was found.
Our first thoughts were the victim either knew the actor or was familiar with him. That's just our first impression. So, who was friends with the victim, who would have access to the victim, who would have opportunity to the victim, and who would he trust?
It really was a shocking case. He was killed execution style. This homicide happened in an area that we don't normally have murders.
Jack's death is the first homicide in Kennedy Township in 10 years. The news stuns his family and friends.
When I got that phone call and I heard Carol's voice, I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Jack's gone." I said, "What do you mean, gone?" She said, "He's dead." And then she said he was murdered. And I just went into shock.
Jack Parks was born the second of 5 kids in Pittsburgh in 1955. Friends and family were everything to him.
Jack always made friends. He was one of the best people I've ever known. He would do anything for anybody. We first met in 1st grade. We hit it off all through high school. And after that, it was a good ride.
Jack was so well liked. He could be charming when he wanted to and funny. He was just a wonderful person.
In 1989, a chance encounter changed Jack's life.
Jack met Carol at the local bar, and I guess they hit it off.
They were 2 peas in a pod. Since he brought Carol, we fell in love with Carol.
Jack was very close to his family. He had about 9 nieces and nephews.
Jack and Carol used to have their nieces and nephews over for sleepovers, making the popcorn and just having a good time. You'd have swore that Jack and Carol were the parents. They didn't have kids, so when those kids were around, they were their kids.
Jack had recently retired, but had big plans for the future.
At that point in his life, Jack was very content. Him and Carol were going to get married.
They've been together for over 25 years. Carol in the beginning really wanted to get married, and Jack didn't. And then at one point, Jack wanted to get married, and Carol didn't. And I used to tell Jack, you know what, I like to be living when you get married, when you say I do. And then when they set the date, I was so happy. It was going to be an exciting, very exciting day.
Tragically, Jack was murdered a month before the ceremony was to take place.
Her and Jack were going to be married on August 31st of that year, and it was really sad. It was so close.
At 5 p.m. on July 21st, 2 hours after Carol found Jack dead, police questioned her at the station.
Talking to Carol was so important because, first of all, we had to determine whether she was or wasn't involved, and we wanted to just get the best timeline from her. During the interview with Carol, she explained that she had left for work as usual, her normal time, about 5:40. She starts work at 6. Everything was fine when she left for work. It wasn't until a realtor called her about a potential buyer for Jack's late mother's home. And when the realtor couldn't get a hold of Jack, Carol started to worry. She tried to call Jack, and there was no answer.
So then she got concerned. He always called her back every time that she tried to get a hold of him. So I think it was approximately about 2 o'clock she left work and then come over and find Jack, of course.
Detectives know that spouses are always the first suspect and must determine if they can trust Carol's version of events.
We have a timeline between 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. when she returns home. In some cases, if a person's a cold-blooded killer, they may have killed him before she left the house, and then all of a sudden she finds him, and the killer's right in front of us.
Her demeanor, she was very upset, but you can't take a chance by skipping a stone and not trying to look at her.
Detectives are suspicious of why it took the couple so long to decide to get married, and if someone had cold feet.
Something that we thought is, are either one of them having affairs with someone else? Could that be a possible motivation, and is this upcoming wedding triggering that?
Coming up, detectives uncover a family feud.
They just decided to distance themselves and not let him come to the house.
And learn Jack's inner circle isn't as loving and devoted as it first seems.
Things got more contentious.
As police keep digging, more suspects surface.
We learned of several burglaries.
They had concerns about the employees. they hire criminals.
Just when the investigation is about to hit another dead end,
We had no idea who would have done this.
detectives make a crucial discovery.
It was exactly what we needed.
When we got the phone records back, it was, oh my God.
That was an aha moment.
Kennedy Township Police are investigating the area's first homicide in a decade. 59-year-old Jack Parks was found dead in his home by his fiancée Carol in what appears to be a robbery. But since there was no forced entry, investigators try to determine if this was actually a staged attack, and if the motive was something more personal.
When we interviewed Carol, we had to look at what role, if any, that upcoming wedding had in what happened. We had to start looking at every aspect of their lifestyle. What were the family dynamics? We had to chip away at a number of things in their life. Things that happened that day, but also things that might have happened in the past that could be a motivation for this murder.
They had their differences. They'd have their arguments. But it wasn't my point to get involved in their squabbles.
We kept talking more and more about any kind of problems that they had had in their home. And I asked her, do either of them have a gun? And she said that they did not.
Carol says she would never do anything to hurt the love of her life. She wanted to marry him. Jack was her soulmate.
Jack and Carol, they loved each other. They felt they were already married. To everybody, they were husband and wife years before, the wedding was planned.
Carol was very upset. It was very difficult to talk to her while she processed that emotion, but then to still get the information we needed to keep moving the investigation forward. To me, that was a sign that she wasn't involved.
With suspicion shifting from Carol for now, investigators explore whether theft was the main motive.
The bedroom was ransacked. The mattress was disturbed. Things were emptied out of drawers.
Carol had indicated to me some items that should be there. Their wedding rings that they had bought. Jack collected some coins. He had some expensive watches. She indicated that the watches should be in the boxes. When we first processed the areas of disarray, none of those items were there. That was our first big clue to go off of. I knew that if we could find that jewelry, we could find who was involved. We didn't know if the person who took it might have given it to someone else, but we had to start with where is it, who has it, and how did they get it.
The next morning, the autopsy report comes in.
He was taken out with one shot and to the right side of his head. It took it to a level where that is someone who probably came there with the intent to either use that weapon to intimidate or control Jack. There was a projectile that was recovered from his skull, and we were able to determine that we were looking for this .380.
So that was a good start for us. Now we knew what kind of gun we were looking for.
During the victim's autopsy, you could see that there were no wounds on his hands at all. There were no scratches. There were no broken fingernails. Nothing that seemed to indicate that he had had a chance to fight back. He had been caught completely off guard.
During Carol's interview, she indicated to police that Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson, is someone they should look into.
Bradley was living across the street with his mother and father, across the street from Jack. And he was always over there. And from what I understand, he was one of the last ones to see Jack alive.
We made contact with Bradley, and Bradley had told us that he had gone over to Jack's house on the 21st, and he said he got there around 10:30 in the morning.
Detectives find that timing suspicious. They know Jack was killed sometime between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. that day.
I asked him, I said, Bradley, what did you go over there to talk to him about? And he said, well, Jack's mother had passed away, and he knew that Jack was looking to sell the home. But Bradley wanted to negotiate a deal with Jack, and he wanted to talk to Jack alone because he said, I don't want Carol weighing in on this. I want this to be a Parks family matter, and I want to discuss it with him. In his words, I didn't want her putting her 2 cents in. And that was a phrase that seemed to hint at some kind of animosity.
Bradley tells investigators that he finds Carol too controlling and that she shouldn't have a say in this family decision.
Jack wanted to wait until he could talk with Carol about it, which sort of defeated the purpose of why Bradley had gone there when she wasn't home. So he said he ended up leaving and they were going to revisit the conversation later.
As investigators press him further, Bradley reveals an alarming fact.
We did ask him about any firearms that he owned, and when Bradley told us he owned a .380 caliber pistol, it kind of was like, okay, this maybe something broke bad, because now we know Carol leaves for work at 6 a.m. and Jack's alive at 10:30 because Brad's telling us he's over there.
He indicated he had left about 11:15. With Bradley's timeline, it definitely seemed that Bradley was very close in time to when Jack would have been killed. And he put himself there. He had the same type of gun.
Had the discussion about Jack's mother's house turned fatal?
With the timing of Bradley's conversation with Jack, it made me wonder whether things got more contentious than he was alluding to in my interview with him, or did he leave there upset, or did somebody else come back and do something to Jack? It had to be looked into.
"12 hours after Jack Parks was found dead, investigators chased down leads around their latest person of interest, Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson.
When I found out that Bradley was a suspect, I was mad. I was really upset, knowing that they thought that. But then again, when it comes to an investigation, the police are doing their job.
Bradley and Jack had a disagreement, and he admits to owning the same caliber gun.
So that definitely stepped up our interest in Bradley. This is a gun that we needed to take a look at.
Bradley's gun was collected, taken to the lab where it was test fired. The ballistics on the gun did not match the projectile that was recovered from Jack during the autopsy.
With nothing concrete linking Bradley to the murder, he is dropped as a suspect. Detectives also corroborate Carol's alibi.
On the day that this happened, we were able to verify that she was at work and she was accounted for at that time. We were able to eliminate Carol as a suspect.
Looking for new leads, detectives speak to the other nieces and nephews who were close to Jack.
During our interview of Carol, she had told us about her nephew, Michael LaPea, who was almost like a son to her, and he had been at the house a lot.
They got along good. Michael joined the military. Jack was very proud of Michael. Jack took pride in the nieces and nephews because he watched them grow up.
Michael was brought in to the homicide office and interviewed about Jack's murder. And during that interview, Michael had said that he was unemployed. He was trying to seek help through the VA hospital due to his PTSD from being in the Army. Michael had been discharged from the military due to his use of cannabis.
Michael also admits he'd fallen out with the family, including his aunt and uncle, and hadn't seen them in a year.
He specifically denied being over near the victim's house, and he made reference to them being estranged. Michael had a bit of a drug problem, and Carol and Jack decided to distance themselves from Michael and not let him come to the house.
Detectives still need to know where Michael was when Jack was killed.
We knew Carol left around 6 a.m. We knew that Bradley was there about 10:30. We knew Carol found him around 3 o'clock. So there's a window of opportunity of about 4 hours. He told us he was at home in Sharpsburg on the day of the incident, July 21st, 20 minutes away from Jack's house.
He said that his girlfriend had kind of unexpectedly taken the day off and they spent the day together. Nothing out of the ordinary. He gave us some landmarks on our timeline that we could check out. Michael and his girlfriend Melanie had gone and done some shopping in the town that they lived in. He said that he had had a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital later that afternoon. These were things at businesses and locations that we could check from doing surveillance video or getting sales transactions. Michael's girlfriend Melanie did corroborate his activities, and she stated they had spent the day together.
It was determined that his alibi had checked out.
A day into the investigation, with Jack's closest circle cleared, investigators escalate the search for the missing jewelry.
We were physically going to many pawn shops to try to see if anybody had sold this jewelry. We didn't get any traction with that.
That's when we started doing a canvass of the neighborhood.
When we were doing our neighborhood canvass, so many people had mentioned near their house there's a meat factory, and they had concerns about the employees. We had heard things like they hire people with records, they hire criminals. From talking to Carol, she said they have a straight view into Carol and Jack's home, and Jack had mentioned sometimes he would let people use his phone or use the bathroom when they were on their break, and it upset her.
In a case like this, you may see, hey, look at this guy, he got some gold on. It's a crime of opportunity.
We knew that they got their morning break right around the time when people stopped hearing from Jack, so we definitely wanted to look into that and see what the consensus was over there.
I think we did like almost 40 interviews of all the employees to see who they were.
One worker in particular piques police interest.
Ronald Blevins was a name that came up from multiple employees in the context of people who had gone over to Jack's. This may be the person that Carol was aware that had come over there. Ronald Blevins was somebody who had had a criminal history of petty theft and assault, so he was on our radar for sure.
Investigators worked quickly to bring Ronald in for an interview.
Ronald indicated that he had known Jack and they were actually friendly, and that's why he was allowed to come into the house when Carol wasn't home. Carol said she would get upset with Jack. She would say, Jack, don't just let anyone in our house. You can't do that. And he would just, kind of shrug it off. But she just didn't want people coming into the house that she didn't know.
Investigators asked Ronald point blank if he had anything to do with Jack's murder.
He said he had no involvement in Jack's death. The day that Jack was killed, Ronald didn't come to work. He had actually taken scheduled vacation for Friday and Monday. Ronald Blevins' alibi checked out, and we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
Desperate for a new lead, investigators look for similarities with other robberies in the area.
After Jack's murder, we talked to the local authorities, and during that we learned of several burglaries, one of which an older lady was burglarized and about $5,000 worth of quarters were taken.
Jack's killer had stolen his coins as well as jewelry. Is this the same person? And could they strike again?
The neighbors were very afraid. We still have a killer out there.
It was a whodunit. Once something like this happened, you think that anything's possible now.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of Jack Parks suspect his murder could be linked to another recent robbery in the neighborhood.
We learned that during that burglary, there were some items similar to what Jack had that were taken, and it was a burglary that happened during the day, which is the timeline we were looking at in this particular incident. Oftentimes in our investigations, we see that residential burglaries are done during the day in bedroom communities where the chance of the people inside the home being at work are better, and that way they can go in and they can take what they need without fear of being caught.
With Jack being retired and home all day, had he caught the burglar red-handed and paid the ultimate price? The neighboring police department already has a suspect in custody.
Vernon Zielinski was identified as a possible suspect in this case. He had been recently arrested.
The items that Vernon was accused of taking were coins, while Jack had coins that were missing. So Vernon Zielinski was tracked down and he was interviewed. We really just wanted to do an interview and determine what connection, if any, he had to Jack. During the interview, he said that he had been arrested for the burglary, but that burglary was at an old employer's house. He denied knowing Jack, and he said that the day that this happened, he was actually at work.
We confirmed that through his new employer, that he was working that day, during the time frame that this would have occurred.
Vernon was somebody we were absolutely able to rule out of being directly involved. At that stage in the investigation, we had no idea who might have done this and why.
48 hours after Jack's murder, with no arrests in the case, fear is growing in Kennedy Township.
Everyone was concerned that how in broad daylight can someone walk into a house, kill somebody, and walk out without even being seen.
The hardest thing to comprehend was the murder. It was point-blank assassination. Stone cold killing. You never expect anything like this. I know I didn't.
Waiting for an arrest, you're still in that daze of trying to process it all. He's not coming back. It's just too unbelievable. Is this going to be another murder unsolved?
We had a lot of information to go on, and we were constantly moving the investigation forward. People were being eliminated, further suspects were being developed.
3 days after Jack was discovered dead, police get a major break.
A local pawn shop in Sharpsburg, PA, which is another small little borough within Allegheny County, the owner had called the local police due to some suspicious activity. On the day of the incident, July 21st, he said a gentleman came in with a cachet of gold and was trying to sell it to him.
What the employee found to be concerning was, first of all, the jewelry was manipulated. It was very distinguishable pieces, but they had been, it seemed to be hammered or just manipulated in a way that would make them hard for law enforcement to identify. It threw up a red flag to him, but also he seemed to think that this was a person who had sold him stolen jewelry in the past. So he didn't buy the jewelry, but he also had the foresight to know he wanted to see where this jewelry might have come from. He knew it was important to get a picture of it. So he took a photograph of the items that this person was trying to sell.
He provided us with the photographs, and they were taken to Carol, who viewed them.
She became very upset. She started crying, and she said, "That's our jewelry."
It felt like we were closing in. Based upon the photograph of the jewelry, we were able to get that out to the local department. They could share it with the pawn shop owners in town if anyone comes in with this.
Investigators hope they can identify the seller.
The pawn shop owner was able to give a good description of the person who brought the jewelry in. A younger white male, black hair, and thin build. That description was provided to the local police chief in Sharpsburg, and he thought that fit the description of the white male from that area. It gave us a very good lead in this case. A photo array was put together to include 8 individual photographs, and they were shown to the shop owner.
We have a set of instructions that we give them, and we say, the person that we're looking for may or may not be in here, but if you see the person, indicate it on the lineup. So once he reviewed the photo array, he did identify who that person was. It was a huge break. It was exactly what we needed.
Coming up, police find stunning evidence pointing to Jack's killer.
In the video, we knew exactly who it was.
This was a shock to everyone.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
But making an arrest wouldn't be easy.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Until investigators find proof no one can deny.
Those records don't lie.
Detectives have just identified the man who tried to pawn murder victim Jack Park's jewelry. His name? Brian Gibbons.
He's been a known thief to the local police department. We went after that lead strong.
We were feeling pretty confident that Mr. Gibbons may be our man, or at least know who our man was. We were very excited and very motivated to go find him.
Brian has a long history of petty crimes, but investigators need to determine if he's a killer. 4 days after the murder, they get a warrant to search his home.
Specifically, we were looking for any of the very distinguishing items that Jack Parks had. Unfortunately, we didn't find any of the victim's jewelry in the house, but we did find some items that did turn out to be stolen from someone else.
Based upon the search at Mr. Gibbons' residence, we were able to arrest him and have him sent to the county jail.
Investigators question Brian about Jack's missing jewelry.
He said that he didn't have anything to do with it. At that point, we were trying to determine if perhaps he'd been given some jewelry to sell, that maybe he didn't know its origin and he went to go sell it. We really just wanted to see if we could come up with any connection to rule him either in or out on the homicide of Jack Parks.
Brian tells detectives he doesn't know the victim and has never been to his home.
He said he had no connection to Jack at all. He denied having any knowledge of the Jack Parks homicide. We asked, well, what's your alibi? And he goes, I was arrested for entering an abandoned house that day. And that was confirmed. Brian was not the killer. He had a solid alibi.
It was clear that he was not the same individual who had come in to the store on that Monday that tried to sell the jewelry.
The pawn shop owner mistakenly identified the wrong person.
The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
We thought we had it, but then once we eliminated him, we took a pause. We had to step back a minute, not start all over, but then keep everything else in perspective.
While detectives hunt for new leads, Jack's loved ones struggle with their grief. Instead of looking forward to Jack's wedding, 5 days after his murder, they attend his funeral.
When he told me he was going to get married, his brother and I would have stood up for him, I was proud because I was never a best man. And there I was, carrying his casket. God, to have something like that happen in such a quick time, it's devastating to everybody.
You feel the hurt, but it really doesn't sink in until the funeral's all over. And then the shock is over. It's reality. He's gone.
Fearing the case could go cold, a week after the murder, police step up the hunt for Jack's stolen jewelry, hoping the culprit is still attempting to sell it at a pawn shop.
We all just sort of fanned out and we took particular geographical areas. We knew there was still a person that was out there trying to sell Jack's jewelry, and we had to just keep holding out hope that the pawn shop would take their identification, that they would keep good records. That's what kept us going, honestly. There is a detective in the city of Pittsburgh who is a pawn shop records analyst, and I reached out to her and I told her what items that we had missing, and on August 4th I heard back from her, and she told me that she had found the jewelry where it had been sold.
Investigators race to the pawn shop.
We had to go take a physical look at it, see who, if anybody, was on camera. Some store policies, all they have to do is take an individual's driver's license number. They don't even have to make a photocopy of it. So we were trying to remain optimistic that somehow we would get an image of the actual person who tried to sell that jewelry. It could have been anyone at that point.
The pawn shop has surveillance video, and what detectives see on tape is jaw-dropping.
It was, oh my God.
We knew exactly who it was. In the video, it was Michael Apaya, which was Carol's nephew that Jack raised like one of his own.
This was a shock to everyone.
When we first had dealings with Michael, early on in the investigation, he did provide an alibi about businesses he was at, doctor's appointments.
Michael had his girlfriend Melanie saying that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed. So it was kind of going back, trying to retrace what he had initially told us.
We still had to do a little bit more digging. We had to work on if we were missing something. Early on, when we talked to Michael, he had given detectives his phone number. I wanted to get his phone records.
While investigators wait for those records, they call Michael back in.
We are going to interview him and see what he has to say now that we have him on tape pawning his uncle's jewelry.
We decided that it would probably be ideal to bring Michael and his girlfriend Melanie in at the same time, being that she was the person who was providing an alibi for him, and chip away at that and see where the truth lied. We took them both back to our office, and they were interviewed in separate rooms. Michael, in his interview, was initially very adamant that he had nothing to do with this. He denied involvement with the murder, involvement with the jewelry, and he just would not deviate from that.
Melanie stands by her story, too.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Melanie is pretty much telling us that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed.
She was just defensive and trying to argue with what we knew was not true. And that was that he had sold Jack's jewelry. We showed her a picture of the jewelry and she tried to say it was hers. And we knew that was a lie.
With neither Michael nor Melanie cracking under the pressure, detectives need something to break the deadlock.
When we got the information about the cell phone records, it was a huge break. We were very happy that it finally had come through. It was like everything came full circle.
Two weeks after Jack Parks was shot to death in his own home, investigators get the break in the case they needed: incriminating cell phone GPS data.
When I got Michael's phone records, I started to see where generally he spent most of his time, which was consistent with his home.
He told us he was in Sharpsburg, 20 minutes away from Jack's house, on the day of the incident.
Parts of his alibi checked out, cell phone data-wise, but there was an anomaly where about 11:45, his cell phone pinged over in the area of Jack and Carol's house. To me, the significance of 11:45 was it is in this time where Carol can't reach Jack.
It would be impossible to be in Sharpsburg and your phone ping off a tower in Kennedy Township. The amount of distance between the two, it wouldn't be possible. He was not at home. He was over near his uncle's house.
So 11:45, Michael's phone being over there was an aha moment. Those records don't lie.
Detectives want to see how Michael will react when confronted with his own cell phone records.
It was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat. He became very quiet, took a second, and he just let it all out.
I was suffering from PTSD, and the morning of July 21st, I asked Mel to take a ride with me. She just drove down with me and I parked her car. I told her to wait. She never got out of the car. She had no clue where we were going.
Michael's explanation of why he went to see Jack only raises more suspicion.
About a year ago, I was accused of stealing jewelry, and I wanted to make amends. I wanted to fix it. I knocked on a door to apologize and talk. At that time, he became hostile, and he choked me and swung at me.
His story changed to self-defense.
He had two hands around my neck, and at that time, I felt my life was threatened, and I had a pistol 380 on me. It went off.
Reconciling that just wasn't possible. Jack was shot one time, right close to his ear. Basically, someone held a gun to his head and executed him.
He fell to the floor, and I panicked. Ren grabbed jewelry, and I left.
Michael tells detectives he sold the jewelry for $1,000. Even more shocking is what he spent the money on.
You stated that that's one of the people you sometimes purchase narcotics from.
Yes. I gave him about $6 to $7.
In addition to that, several days later, what did he give you?
He gave me heroin.
Michael was following a path of substance abuse that was getting to be more addictive drugs, and his use was increasing. It wasn't recreational anymore. It was more the behavior of an addict.
It was heartbreaking for us to know that someone who was almost like Jack's son, a very close family member, would do something like that in exchange for a couple of dollars to get high.
I believe Michael went to that house to take jewelry. He knew Jack was there, and the only way he was going to get that jewelry is if Jack was dead. He walked up to the house, and as soon as Jack met him at the door and turned his back to him, he shot him, and he fell, and he died instantly.
On August 5th, 2014, Michael LaPaya is charged with first-degree murder.
To say to Carol, we know who did this, it was hard, but the hardest answer that we had for her is when she said, Michael who? And he had the same last name as her, really. It was hard to tell her that, it's your nephew. And it just hit her, and she was very upset.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
It's still to this day so hard to believe that somebody that they loved, Michael, could have done something like this. I mean, what he did, I can't describe. There's no words.
At trial, Michael is found guilty. On December 9th, 2015, the 24-year-old is sentenced to life in prison.
He took a loving, caring man and just executed him. There was no winners. We lost Jack. Who won? Nobody.
I would never forgive him. Michael took away my best friend, my brother. He took away a lot from me. To this day, I still hate the guy.
Jack will never be forgotten. In the beginning, it's hard talking about a loved one without really breaking down crying. But you continue to talk about him. You keep their memory alive. And that's how he stays with us.
Every day, he's here in my mind, my heart, and my dreams. I see his face. Always smiling. I know he's flying with the angels.
A vibrant, outgoing young mother of three.
She was so full of life. She had so many friends, and she was a very, happy person.
Murdered in the safety of her own home.
The victim had been stabbed multiple times in the chest area.
It looked like somebody had tried to carve her heart right from her body.
Investigators discover a history of troubled romances.
He drank incessantly. It caused a lot of problems.
He had repeatedly been trying to get more visitation with his son, and he was really upset about it.
He was just furious that she was having a baby.
However, as time progressed, the leads started drying up.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
The police were contacted by a young woman.
And she said, hey, I've got this inkling in my stomach. Can you check out this person?
New evidence leads to a culprit no one saw coming.
When I walked out of that house, I said to myself, my God, he did this.
His rage, his obsession just consumed him.
How could someone commit such a horrific, violent attack and continue to live among us for another 8 years?
Less than an hour outside Minneapolis, Big Lake, Minnesota feels like a world away from the bustling city. But in February of 1992, this peaceful town is rocked by a horrific discovery.
911 dispatch. What's the problem?
My wife is dead. I just came home, and my little girl is here, and she's in the bedroom, and she's been stabbed. I got the 2 kids here. I'm like, God, what's happened?
Is she breathing?
Oh, she's dead. She's cold. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
The caller, Charlie Jensen, says the victim is his wife, 39-year-old mother of 3, Linda Jensen.
At about 4:18 p.m., I received a call in my office from my lieutenant who indicated that a homicide occurred in Big Lake Township.
While patrol officers take Charlie and the 2 children away from the home, detectives arrive and begin their investigation.
When I entered the scene, I entered the bedroom, saw the victim lying at the foot of the bed face up, ascertained obviously that that person was dead.
She was naked. She had a comforter over her body with a large knife, pinning the comforter to her body, having been stabbed right through her chest. The victim had been stabbed not just once, multiple times in the chest area.
There was some dried blood on the corner of her mouth. The individual was cold to the touch. The victim appeared to be dead for quite some time.
Even for seasoned detectives, the viciousness of the attack is shocking.
I thought it was a horrific overkill with the knife.
It looked like somebody had tried to carve her heart right from her body.
My theory was the perpetrator was really angry with the individual, and that's why he had stabbed her in such a heinous way. The knife appeared to be like a kitchen steak knife. It was later ascertained that the knife itself had been taken from a butcher block in the kitchen of the residence.
After finishing up with the body, investigators examined the rest of the home for clues.
There was nothing that appeared to be out of place whatsoever. The house may have been a little on the messy side, but there was no signs of any of the drawers being opened, nothing being disturbed. I observed that there was no sign of a forced entry.
It was really actually kind of a clean crime scene, other than the homicide itself. No fingerprints, no blood samples.
As detectives continue searching for evidence, news of Linda's murder reaches her family.
I got a phone call from Charlie, and he said, "We lost Linda. Linda's dead. She's been murdered." I was screaming, just screamed and screamed and screamed because she was gone, and I didn't want to believe it.
Born in a Minneapolis suburb in 1952, Linda had 3 siblings.
Linda was my dark-haired sister, beautiful, beautiful sister. She was so full of life. Linda was the person that you find climbing a tree. She loved to swim. She just would go, go, go.
Linda's boundless energy continued into her adult years.
Linda loved to go speed skating. She loved to run and loved to jog and, do everything to keep herself in shape.
In 1971, Linda married her childhood sweetheart, Charlie.
My folks would rent a cabinette every year, and it happened to be Charlie's parents' cabin resort. And that's how Linda and Charlie met. Then when they first got married, Charlie and Linda were so much in love.
Their first child, Andrew, was born in 1973.
She was, so excited, to have a little boy. She was so happy.
But the fairy tale marriage didn't last.
They were married for 7 years. When she filed for divorce, it came, out that they were getting divorced. It was because of his drinking.
4 years later, while in a new relationship, Linda gave birth to her second son, Joey. But then, in 1990, Linda and Charlie reunited.
Linda still loved Charlie, and Charlie still loved Linda. They remarried on April 4th, 1991, which would have been their 20th wedding anniversary. She was so happy. She was so content. And then she had Lisa on June 12th of 91.
As Linda, Charlie, and the 3 children settled down in Big Lake, their future looked bright.
She just loved it in Big Lake. They had a few acreages. She was so together with her life. She had so many friends, and she was a very happy person.
Now, Linda's loved ones are left asking who took her life so viciously and why.
They were very devastated about what occurred to her, and so we wanted to solve this case as quickly as possible. They no longer have a mother or a spouse, and it was a very, very tragic case indeed.
Having established a clear picture of their victim, detectives turn their attention to Linda's husband, Charlie.
Usually in an investigation, especially a homicide investigation, you usually look at the person closest to the victim. Charlie appeared very upset about the situation, but he was coherent. He was able to give us information.
When investigators ask Charlie about the day of the murder, he tells them it was an ordinary day. He went to work that morning, while Linda stayed home with the baby.
At about 9:45 in the morning, he called Linda, and he received no answer. By noon, he called the 3rd time, and again received no answer. Charlie was a little upset because he thought she would be home, so he left work, and he arrives at his residence at about 4:05.
When Charlie walked in the door, he found 9-year-old Joey and 8-month-old Lisa alone in the house.
Joey, who was now home from school, doing homework at a table, and then he saw that Lisa was still in the playpen, wearing the same clothing that she was when he left that morning, and he thought this was not right because there's no way that Linda would have left the baby in the same clothing all day long. So he went downstairs to the laundry room to look for her. He could not find her. He went back into the bedroom again and went further into the bedroom where he then observed Linda lying on the floor. He indicated to me that the comforter was higher up on her body, and he apparently pulled it down. He also indicated that he touched the knife, and so he said if his fingerprints would have appeared on the knife, that is his reason.
That would be an immediate red flag. That would have caused investigators to focus right on Charlie.
As an investigator, you say, well, my God, that's something we got to look at a little deeper.
Investigators also knew their early relationship was a volatile relationship. They did find their way back to each other, but their relationship certainly was rocky.
You always assume that perhaps the spouse is the person that perpetrated the crime, and he was right at the top of the list.
Coming up, investigators get a promising lead.
She saw a man in a pickup truck pulling out of the driveway
and uncover sinister motives.
Would it be possible for him to hire someone to kill Linda?
He became this person that she was afraid of.
After a suspect is caught in a lie.
He claimed he didn't know who she was.
He was asked to give a DNA sample and refused.
The case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
The family were outraged. You could feel the chill in the courtroom.
No way in hell. No way could that happen.
Police are investigating the brutal murder of 39-year-old mother of 3, Linda Jensen. Their first suspect is Linda's husband, Charlie, who has just admitted his fingerprints are likely on the murder weapon.
He indicated that he touched the knife. He never pulled it out, but he did touch the knife by the handle.
Is Charlie trying to cover his tracks? Searching for a possible motive, detectives ask why he and Linda divorced 14 years ago.
Charlie indicated that they had a good relationship. The only reason the marriage broke up was simply because of his drinking.
Before Linda and Charlie got married, the first marriage, Charlie got sent to Vietnam. What he went through in Vietnam always stayed with him, and he got into heavy drinking because of that.
He drank incessantly. It caused a lot of problems in the marriage. So eventually, by 1978, Linda sought a divorce.
When Linda and Charlie remarried in 1991, Charlie had stopped drinking, but other demons remained.
Charlie had, really kind of given up his partying, and he became more of an adult. But yet, what he went through in Vietnam always stayed with him.
Had Charlie's old issues returned, this time with fatal consequences? Investigators get to work checking Charlie's alibi.
Charlie indicated that he left the residence at about 6:15 a.m. to go to work. and he proceeded back to his residence at about 4:05 p.m. We retraced his steps, and we talked to a fellow coworker who verified the time that Charlie had arrived at work and the time that he left, and no time during that day did he ever leave.
Before detectives let Charlie go, they take a sample of his DNA.
At that time, we could do a little bit of DNA testing, but it hadn't reached the point where it could identify a suspect positively. So the investigative team was collecting DNA samples and then preserving it.
Charlie was also asked to do a polygraph test, which he did. He passed the polygraph test and was eliminated as a suspect.
Everything he said was down to the wire. He could not have been the perpetrator in this crime based on the timeline.
While investigators search for their next suspect, news of the murder leaves Big Lake residents fearful.
This crime was a shock to the community. It was a smaller community, and they didn't have many homicides. To think that somebody is still out there walking the street and you don't know who, what would be worse?
Your house is supposed to be your safety, and to know that she was murdered in her house, that somebody decided to play God and take her life. Who could do that?
24 hours into the investigation, detectives receive their first tip.
The investigative team got a call from a rural mail carrier who had claimed that she had been by the Jensen house on the day of the homicide.
The mail carrier arrived at the house at around 11:30 that morning, and she said at the time she saw a man in a pickup truck pulling out of the driveway, and she said she got a pretty good description of the man.
The postal worker described the truck as an older truck. I believe it was tan, two-tone tan, and it was occupied by a Caucasian male, late 30s, early 40s, kind of a scruffy guy with a beard.
We had a sketch artist that was involved in trying to recreate the picture of that person that the mail carrier supposedly saw.
The sheriff's office did release that sketch to the media, and it was widely publicized.
While investigators wait for witnesses to identify the driver of the truck, officers are sent door to door around Linda's home.
At this point, he had no leads whatsoever, so that was the first place we started looking at was the neighborhood itself. I've had cases in the past that were solved by people that observed something.
On this canvas in particular, we were looking to see if any of the neighbors had seen anything or seen a truck or anything suspicious that morning.
When detectives hear that Linda's neighbors, the Jones family, may have seen the pickup truck, they immediately knock on their door.
Kent Jones was a scout leader. We had 4 children. We're hoping that he could name the person that the mail carrier observed leaving the Jensen residence.
And at the time, he told us he was at home and his wife was present, and he didn't know Linda Jensen.
Deborah Jones confirms that she has seen the pickup truck around the neighborhood, but neither she nor her husband can identify the man seen driving the vehicle.
We went through the entire neighborhood asking the same people basically the same questions, but no one really knew the guy in the truck. So we were really disappointed.
Detectives decide to turn their attention toward the other men from Linda's love life.
After Linda and Charlie divorced in 1978, Linda became involved with an individual by the name of Robert Beard. Linda had a child with him, Joey, and they were together for about 4 years before they separated.
Bob Beard really didn't see much of Joey and was really not a father figure, and, he never paid child support.
He had given up custody, but Bob Beard had repeatedly been trying to get more visitation, and sometimes he wouldn't see the kid but once or twice a year, and he was really upset about it.
When investigators speak to Linda's husband, Charlie, about Bob Beard, what he tells them is startling.
Charlie indicated to investigators that Mr. Beard had actually contacted Linda at least twice, if not more, within a few weeks before she was murdered. Bob wanted to see Joey and perhaps even gain custody of him.
Had Bob confronted Linda about custody and attacked her in a rage,
the individual that perpetrated this crime was angry at her about something.
Bob Beard was an absolute ideal suspect.
Detectives investigating the murder of Linda Jensen suspect she may have been killed by her ex, Bob Beard, in a battle over custody of their son, Joey.
During the investigation, we learned that Linda had been with the guy, and he was kind of a bad actor. According to the family, Linda was concerned about Bob due to his anger issues and the fact that he was drinking and using drugs.
Did Linda and Bob's dispute turn fatal? Detectives bring Bob in for an interview.
I questioned him, when were you last in contact with Linda Jensen? And he indicated, God, it'd been a long time. So I confronted him with what Charlie had said, and he denied it. He said, no, I haven't been in contact with her.
If he was giving false information, that would make him look very suspicious as a possible perpetrator.
Investigators asked Bob where he was the day Linda was murdered.
During the interview, he admitted that that day of Linda's homicide, that he'd been at home alone and had no alibi other than that. I was home alone, he said.
Beard told investigators that he had no car and that he wouldn't be able to walk to her residence.
After providing this information, he then lawyered up, indicated that he would not speak unless his lawyer was present, so that was very frustrating. Usually when a person wants a lawyer present, that usually indicates to us that they have something to hide.
Bob remains on the suspect list, but with no concrete evidence tying him to Linda's murder, police are forced to let him go. As they continue their investigation, detectives hope the autopsy report will provide a much-needed break.
During the autopsy, they determined that she'd been strangled and that subsequently she'd been also stabbed through the chest. But the cause of death, more than likely, was the strangulation.
It was also found that she had been sexually assaulted, and then there was a DNA swab taken at that time. She was perhaps being strangled during the time that she was being sexually assaulted, and then she was probably stabbed post-mortem, in other words, after death.
Medical examiners also determined Linda's time of death was between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m.
Charlie left the home at 6:45 a.m. About an hour later, the 9-year-old son left the home at about 7:45. That left just Linda Jensen at home with her infant child.
Those who knew her talked about the fact that she would have fought for her life, and so it probably was a very, very violent two-way encounter that probably lasted for a little while.
Somebody committed this horrible sexual assault and a nasty homicide, and they're walking around and they got away with it. That's unacceptable.
Convinced Linda was murdered by someone with a personal motive, investigators look at another one of Linda's romantic partners.
According to Charlie, after Linda left Robert Beard, she met an individual by the name of John Sullivan.
When I first met John Sullivan, I didn't like him. He just kind of acted like he was God's gift to women, but that's who she, really cared about, and she did marry him in '86.
After the wedding, John convinced Linda to move to California, but their newlywed bliss quickly faded.
Linda had only been out in California for a short period of time when things were getting kind of rough. A few times when Linda had called, I could tell that she was sad when we would talk. He completely, changed and became this person that she, I think, was a little afraid of. And he wanted Linda to have a child. And Linda knew that she just could not do that. So she convinced him that he should adopt Joey, and that's how she got out of having to have a baby with him.
Over the next few years, John's behavior became more troubling.
There was one particular time where Mr. Sullivan had hit Linda, and they had a major fight.
Linda realized she had to get out of that relationship, and she left and came back to Minnesota.
At this point in time, Charlie was sober, and Linda actually wanted to get back together with him again because, as they said, they always loved each other. When Linda left Mr. Silliman, Linda requested that Mr. Silliman provide child support for Joey. And this was a real bone of contention with him because he felt that she had talked him into adopting him. And then after he adopts Joey, she leaves him. And then he is stuck with the child support.
A judge orders John to pay Linda $300 a month. But then, John receives even more shocking news.
Linda got pregnant with Lisa, and when the divorce papers came to John, and it did have to state in the divorce papers that she was pregnant, but it wasn't his child. He was just furious that she was having a baby with Charlie, and she wouldn't have one with him.
Did Linda's news push John over the edge?
He'd made several phone calls, we were told, that weren't too pleasant with Linda. So he was a potential suspect. Could he have come back and committed this homicide?
Four days after the shocking murder of Linda Jensen, police have learned her abusive ex-husband, John Silliman, was enraged over her child support demands and news of her pregnancy with another man. Did his resentment lead him to kill? Police fly to California to interview him.
When I interviewed him regarding the abuse, he indicated it was a two-way street, that they both abused each other. They fought all the time. They fought over money. They fought over Joey to a certain degree, and they just did not get along at all.
John had motive to want Linda dead, but investigators need to know if he had the opportunity.
During the time of the murder, John would have been working at the elementary school in King City, California. And according to the people he spoke with at the school, he never left the school that entire day.
You know, when you're looking at an alibi on any potential suspect, nothing's black and white with it, but the Silliman alibi, it was airtight.
Even though John's alibi checks out, investigators still believe he could be involved in Linda's murder.
There's a sense that hits you about someone's demeanor, and it might be a look in their eye.
After visiting with him, the question came up, would it be possible for him to hire someone to come up and kill Linda? He would still have an alibi being at school, but someone else could have done the crime.
Detectives scoured John's finances, looking for any evidence he paid for a hit.
But upon reviewing all his bank records, we could not find anything that would have revealed that he had done such a thing.
With John eliminated from the investigation, detectives are back to the drawing board. Desperate for leads, they make a public appeal for information.
We set up a tip line at the Sheriff's Department, and we received in excess of approximately 1,000 calls.
And I think at that point, officers were hoping for just something, anything, that they could use to get them back on track. And maybe somebody looked suspicious, said something suspicious.
Every tip that came in was followed up on as best we could, because you never know when the correct tip is going to be the one that solves the crime. However, as time progressed, the leads started drying up. The family was quite upset. They wanted it solved. We also wanted it solved, but it was very, very difficult to do when you have no further leads coming in.
With no new suspects on their radar, by May 1992, the case grinds to a halt.
It's very difficult when you have a case that goes cold. There's a lot of sacrifice on behalf of the officers involved doing the investigation. They're away from their homes, their families. It can affect you quite drastically.
What could I have missed? And it's just troubling. You don't sleep, you don't rest.
I would call the Sheriff's Department many times a week. I never stopped. I was not going away until this was solved, because I had promised Linda, looking at her in her coffin, till my dying breath, that I would do all I could to find the person that did this, to get this person in jail.
7 years pass, and in 1999, Linda's family persuades a new sheriff to reignite the investigation.
Because of Sandy's insistence opening the case, Sheriff Anderson at the time decided to take a second look at the case.
To start, police offer a reward for new information.
Sometimes in these cases, over time, people who have information that they didn't provide early on can feel more comfortable to come forward. Sometimes they get that nagging feeling that, what I thought was nothing 10 years ago maybe actually means something.
I had all the newspapers and all the TV station contacts, and I would call them and they would put something on because I kept saying, somebody has the key. You might think it's insignificant, but let it out. It might be the key to solve this.
Detectives also revisit key evidence from the initial investigation, including the DNA samples.
When this case reopened, the situation with DNA had changed greatly. There was a database to compare the samples to. Also, when obtaining a sample, it took less time to get a response back.
Investigators always collect DNA samples of family members and anybody with close ties. We did go back and look at potential suspects.
Investigators compared DNA from Linda's sexual assault to samples from her former romantic partners, Bob Beard, Charlie Jensen, and John Silliman, as well as a database of known sex offenders. When the results come back, detectives are stunned.
Investigators took between 80 and 85 DNA samples for testing, and they ruled everybody out. All of the men that she had been involved with in consensual relationships had been eliminated as possible suspects in the homicide.
Yeah, it just kind of dropped me right down. I've worked a lot of homicides, but we had nothing going except here we have this woman who's deceased, been a homicide and rape victim.
It's like, who could have done this? I wanted justice for Linda.
The case goes cold again for another year. But in 2000, police receive an unexpected tip from a woman named Angela Hennon that turns the investigation red hot.
Angela called the sheriff's office and said, hey, I've got this inkling in my stomach and I've had it for years. Can you check out this person?
That was the first lead the police had in over 8 years.
She called in that little piece that we needed. We've been wanting for over 8 years. That broke the case wide open.
Police investigating the 1992 cold case homicide of Linda Jensen have just received their first tip in 8 years. Detectives are stunned when caller Angela Hennon points them to someone familiar.
Angela identified herself as a prior acquaintance of Kent Jones.
Kent Jones was the local Boy Scout leader in the community. Angela Hennon had had an affair with Kent Jones right after the Linda Jensen homicide and said she brought up to Kent Jones the Linda Jensen homicide, and he denied knowing her. And he became very angry and agitated about that subject coming up.
A few months later, Angela indicated that when she was talking to Mr. Jones, he indicated that he knew Linda quite well. He saw her jogging past his residence, he visited with her, and he basically changed his story completely from what he told her previously.
So she felt compelled to report that to the police because she just found it unusual. When investigators first spoke to Mr. Jones in 1992, he was not a suspect. He was just a neighbor.
He denied knowing her as well as perpetrating the crime itself. And his wife alibied him. She said that he had been home that entire day.
So, obtaining the information that Mr. Jones did in fact know Miss Jensen, at least collaterally, told investigators right away that he had been untruthful or deceptive with them.
Well, as an investigator hearing that type of a story, I would think that he has some involvement. There's something that is not right and needs to be followed up further.
Detectives dig into Kent Jones's background.
At the time of the killing, Jones was the leader of the local Boy Scout troop, church-going family. He and his wife Deborah had kids. Certainly the persona of him was that he was a fun-loving, good-natured, well-liked guy.
But as they dug deeper, investigators opened up a different side to him, what he wants you to believe.
Mr. Jones had a lot of skeletons in his closet. Outwardly, he seemed like a family man, and inwardly, he had a very, very dark side to him. He had a criminal history. He rented a storage locker that one night caught on fire. Mr. Jones entered a claim to the insurance company, and as it turned out, he probably had about $35,000 worth of items in that locker and not several hundreds of thousands that he claimed. It was an overclaim, and he was subsequently investigated and charged with defrauding the insurance company.
Investigators then discover an even darker side to the father of four.
There'd been some suspicion that he'd been abusive with his wife in the past.
I read a report that Mrs. Jones had been stabbed.
She apparently slipped and fell onto the open dishwasher, and her body was pierced by a knife that had been put into the dishwasher handle down. And I think some people looked at that and wondered, did that really happen that way? That just doesn't make sense.
Investigators were very suspicious about those circumstances. She, however, stuck to that story and never pursued any charges against her husband.
If Mr. Jones was the person that stabbed her, this is in line with the same thing that happened to Linda Jensen, in that she was stabbed, and it shows that he has a propensity for violence.
Armed with the disturbing new profile of Kent, detectives pay him another visit, this time as a suspect.
They went back to re-interview him and asked him again if he knew Miss Jensen or knew anything about her. He claimed he knew nothing about her, didn't know who she was.
Present at that time was Kent Jones's wife, and she indicated, "No, don't you remember? She was here visiting you about Joey joining the Cub Scouts?" And he got very angry with his wife at that point.
Caught in a lie, Kent changes his story.
He admitted that she used to jog by his house, and they had had conversations in the past. They also asked him point blank if he had had any kind of an affair or if he was involved sexually with Miss Jensen, and he became angry and very defensive.
At that point, he was asked to give a DNA sample, and he refused.
After 8 years of investigation, he was the first person to refuse to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. That, of course, raised another huge red flag.
When I walked out of that house, I said to myself, my God, he did this. I had such a strong feeling, but it's not evidence.
Officers went to the local district court judge and applied for a search warrant in order to obtain a DNA sample from Mr. Jones.
With their warrant in hand, investigators collect Kent Jones's DNA to compare to evidence from the crime scene.
Mr. Jones's sample of DNA was sent to the crime lab, and within a short period of time, we got the results back and the DNA matched.
It was a match on almost every level. There was no question that the DNA at the crime scene came from Mr. Jones.
Thank God they got him. I knew this son of a bitch did it. So I wanted him gone.
Sheriff Anderson called and he said that, I want you to get everybody together. We are making the arrest after you're all here. When they said the name, we had no idea who this guy was. In those 8 years, I never thought I'd be a neighbor.
On July 25th, 2000, Kent Jones is arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Linda Jensen. Despite the DNA match, Kent insists he's innocent.
You're going through scenarios with him to determine what he reacts to or bites on. And if we can get that confession, and none of those scenarios worked with him.
But the DNA was the connection that allowed the case to go to the grand jury to indict Mr. Jones for the murder.
On May 31st, 2001, Kent Jones goes on trial.
Mr. Jones was indicted on 3 different charges. It was first-degree murder, it was second-degree intentional murder, and count 3 was criminal sexual conduct in the first degree.
How could someone who was involved in Boy Scouts, who was involved in his church, who seemingly was a good husband and good father, commit such a horrific, violent attack and continue to live among us for another 8 years? But people looked at the fact that there was a DNA match. They looked at the other evidence presented at the trial, and people thought, this guy really did it.
But when Kent Jones takes the stand, his testimony takes everyone by surprise.
There was a major development that caught literally everybody off guard. He got up on the stand and he told everybody something that just shocked the entire courtroom.
"9 years after Linda Jensen was raped and killed, neighbor Kent Jones is on trial for first-degree murder. But when Kent takes the stand, his defense stuns prosecutors.
Under oath, in court, in front of the jury, he testified that he had actually been having an affair with Linda Jensen.
Mr. Jones's defense was that he was having consensual sex with Linda, and that's why they found the DNA when they did the autopsy on Linda.
The family were outraged. You could feel the chill in the courtroom.
No way in hell. No way could that happen. He murdered my sister, and he's trying to murder her reputation. And how dare he?
And I had to tell the family, I am sorry, but this is Mr. Jones' day in court. The jury can disbelieve it if they want. That's up to them. But there's no way legally I could prevent him from presenting his defense.
Each time he changed his story from, I don't know her, to, oh yeah, I knew her because she jogged by my house, to, wait, we did meet once to talk about Boy Scouts, to, we had a consensual affair. It wasn't laughable, it was just sad.
The decision rests with the jury. On December 8th, 2001, they return their verdict. They find Kent Jones guilty on all 3 charges, and he is later sentenced to life in prison.
I think after all of that, there was a great sense of relief from the family that, you know what, we don't believe this. Thank God the jury didn't believe it either, and this guy is actually going to get what we've been looking for now for years.
After he was sentenced and he was taken out of the courtroom, the jurors came up and were giving us hugs. And you know, I'm thinking it's got to be over.
But less than 3 years later, Linda's family is dealt a sickening blow.
After Mr. Jones's conviction, he did file an appeal that went directly to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Mr. Jones and his attorneys wanted to present evidence of an alternative perpetrator, and the Supreme Court agreed with the defense, overturned the conviction, and resulted in us having to retry the case a second time.
From the time he was arrested, it was like 5-6 years that we've been going through court hearings. How much more does a justice system want this family to go through?
Once the Supreme Court's ruling came out, people started to question whether Jones was going to be released. Were they going to now have barriers at a second trial that might lead to a not guilty verdict?
In November 2006, Kent Jones stands trial again.
On the second trial, out of the blue, he decided he would name Charlie Jensen as the alternative suspect. He still claimed he was having an affair, but this time he testified that he had intercourse with Miss Jensen the morning of the murder.
Kent Jones claims that when Charlie arrived home and discovered the affair, he murdered Linda.
Everyone knew Mr. Jensen had an absolute ironclad alibi, confirmed and reconfirmed, and I thought Mr. Jensen was going to get up and start making a scene and yell or something, because I could see that look in his face. I could see it boiling up. And to his credit, he held his composure.
His lies just kept going farther and farther and farther into left field. And my fear was that it was going to drag on through the court system over and over and over.
The prosecution presents their theory of what really happened that day.
I believe in his mind, Linda was his fantasy girl. He saw her running on occasion past his house. She had spoken with them about Joey joining the Cub Scouts.
This was a crime of obsession. He knew she was home alone with just an infant. For whatever reason, decided to act on his impulse that had probably been building up for months and months.
I believe Mr. Jones went over there to visit with her, talk to her, try to induce her into perhaps having sex with him.
He probably got rejected, he got furious, and this was his moment, and he took it out on her. I think his rage, his obsession just consumed him.
Forced sex on her, strangled her, and eventually killed her.
After strangling Linda, Kent stabbed her several times, pinning the comforter to her chest.
These are crimes that are committed by people that just lose control of any rational thought, and that's consistent with the horrible injuries that Linda suffered.
For the second time in 4 years, a jury convicts Kent Jones of murdering Linda Jensen, and he's again sentenced to life in prison.
I was really happy for the Jensen family in particular, especially having to go through a second trial like they did.
I could finally take a deep breath and have this heavy iron coat that I didn't know I was carrying, have that fall off of me, that it's over, it's done.
Though justice is served, Linda's loved ones have never gotten over her loss.
He's not eligible for release until 2030, and I will be there. I will do anything I can to keep this man in jail forever. He should not be able to enjoy life because he did not allow Linda to enjoy life. There's times that I still want to call her. I miss her every day. I don't have a sister on this earth. And I can still close my eyes and just hear that laugh of hers. That beautiful, carefree laugh and just loving life. Linda loved life.
A loving husband and father with so much to live for.
He did everything for his family. He was an amazing daddy. He loved life. He loved to be happy.
Is ruthlessly gunned down at home in front of his wife.
When he was laying there on the floor, nothing can prepare you for that.
They stood over the victim's body with a shotgun and delivered a fatal blow.
This wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination.
Police tracked down several suspects.
She was absolutely the possible person who was involved. She had all the motive.
He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence.
And we knew that he and the victim had some bad blood between them.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer,
we were pretty frustrated, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
She sang like a songbird.
He had been in possession of the guns used.
And law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
To reveal a killer no one imagined.
This is unbelievable.
It was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
The darkest, blackest soul.
Known for its white sand beaches, Panama City lies on the Gulf Coast of Florida's Panhandle.
Our biggest industry is tourism, with millions of people coming to enjoy the Gulf Coast.
The community is very tight. You know most of your neighbors, you know everybody that you do business with on a personal name basis.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, the town's sense of safety is rocked by a chilling 911 call.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from a woman that her husband had been shot and killed.
There was a lot of shots. I ran back to the bedroom. The killer wasn't in the house. He was coming after us. I literally thought everybody was going to die. And I was so scared.
Police raced to the home, expecting to encounter an active shooter.
Their first thought is clearing that house, making sure that the killer's not still in the house.
As the officer entered, the first thing that he noticed was the victim's body in the kitchen area.
When they started calling out that they were the police and they were there, the wife was in a bedroom.
She had retreated to seek safety for her and her children, which were still in the house.
This is all just happening so quickly. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust that whoever's out there is not the killer.
Officers find no sign of the gunman and assure Angelica it's safe to come out of the bedroom.
The wife came out and she was very, very hysterical.
When they walked me back out, when he was laying there on the floor, I knew he was gone. You have somebody murdering your husband and shooting you, all in seconds. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Angelica identifies the man as her husband, 30-year-old Ron Stovall.
The children were taken to Ron's parents' house. They didn't live too far away. And the victim's wife went to the police department where we could talk to her.
With Angelica and the children out of harm's way, detectives can examine the crime scene.
As a responding detective, I go in and start looking around. Ron, the victim, he had been shot 3 times in the back, once in the hip, and there was a shot to the back of the head.
Investigators find an important clue close to the victim's body.
There were some bloody footprints there on the floor. Part of those footprints had what looked like the letter H, 2 H's kind of next to each other on the sole.
Whoever was wearing that shoe had perpetrated at least part of the crime because they would have been standing in the victim's blood and then exiting the residence following the homicide.
The Stovall's front door also reveals how the murder unfolded.
We could see her husband was shot outside, and then the killer shot through the door, and he got into the house, and he had shot Ron in the back of the head.
As daylight breaks, a forensic team scours the outside of the home.
They found a handgun projectile out on the sidewalk near the driveway.
The killer shot what it clearly looks like a handgun round to the lower extremities, and then you have a shotgun round to the head. This was overkill. They stood over the body and delivered a fatal blow. When you see that type of crime scene, you're looking immediately for someone that displayed some type of grudge or emotional hatred for the victim.
While forensics wrap up their investigation at the crime scene, detectives head to the police station to speak with Ron's wife, Angelica.
We really took note how emotionally overtaken she was. But she had been an eyewitness to this scene, so she was critical in our investigation.
I can't even comprehend what's going on. He was dead. I did not want to live without him. Ron was truly amazing. He was always full of life, very kind, sincere, very real.
Born in Panama City, Ron Stovall was one of 4 siblings.
He was very close with his family. He was always out doing stuff with school, doing stuff with the church.
He was well known within the community.
Ron served almost 4 years in the Navy. He had felt a commitment to his country and enjoyed his naval service.
Ron always dreamt of having a family, and in 1989, he met his first wife, Tina Trexler.
Tina and Ron got married, and they had 1 child. They had a daughter.
The marriage was a rocky one, and after 6 years, it fell apart. Soon after, Ron met single mom Angelica at a local beach bar.
He said he knew from the second he saw me that he loved me. Our first night, we went on a date, took me to the beach, to the ocean, put out a blanket, listened to some Marvin Gaye, had Italian food. It was very romantic. He stole my heart, and I was never in love before. I just fell right into his arms.
In 1997, the couple married. Just like Ron, Angelica had a child from a previous relationship. A year later, their family of 4 became 5 when they had a daughter of their own.
Ron took on several jobs. He worked as a waiter, he worked as a delivery man for the UPS companies.
He was very dedicated, and he just got his massage therapy license. He did everything for his family. We were very happy.
Who would want to gun down this loving husband and father in cold blood? At the station, Angelica tells police how the murder unfolded.
I was able to tell the cops everything I knew, and I didn't try to hold anything back. Ron got up at about 3 o'clock every morning, and I would get up and make his lunch for him to take to work.
She explains how Ron left the house and was suddenly ambushed.
There were some shots. I didn't know what was going on. He collapsed on the ground, and the killer tried coming through the door, so I was fighting with him. He got his hand through it. I grabbed the gun, and he opened the door with his hand, and I looked down the barrel of that silver gun, and he shot it.
The bullet just misses Angelica.
I ran back to the bedroom.
As Angelica shares more details about the deadly attack, detectives gain important information about the killer.
She described him as male, brown eyes, brown hair, and that he had some type of facial hair, possibly a mustache. She indicated hearing the assailant say to Ron as he was delivering the fatal gunshot wound, "This is for her."
It sounded very evil.
Angelica tells police she doesn't know the meaning behind the killer's words.
We need to find out who her was, and we needed to find out what made this so personal to her.
Well, this wasn't just a random killing. This was an assassination, is what it was.
Investigators ask Angelica who might want Ron dead.
Immediately, she went to Tina, his ex-wife. Ms. Stovall indicated that the relationship between Ron and his ex-wife was volatile. There was a custody issue over their daughter.
Things got a little bit more sticky with the custody setup, and Ron was filing for full custody of the child.
Could the bitter custody battle have turned deadly?
This was an enormous red flag for us as a team. Whoever her was may have in fact had to do with his ex-wife.
It's probably one of the worst situations we ever deal with, is with a man and woman and children involved. It will just about make a person do anything.
Coming up, police uncover a key piece of evidence.
He brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene,
leading to a disturbing plot.
The photo identification that made him a prime suspect.
It was his eyes. What I saw was the same person.
And a sickening betrayal no one saw coming.
They planned this whole thing.
None of us had ever worked a case like this.
I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of 30-year-old Ron Stovall are looking into his relationship with his ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
We knew that there was an extreme amount of tension between Ron and his ex-wife, and there was a custody battle that was forthcoming.
Ron and Tina originally shared custody, but Ron had filed a petition basically saying that he wanted full custody of the child.
Up to this point, Tina was that individual that had the most to gain from Ron's death. Perhaps she had not been the one on scene, but it still doesn't eliminate her as having some type of involvement.
This looked like certainly an intentional and a premeditated killing. Might have been a killing for hire.
Detectives speak to Ron's friends and family to get a clearer picture of the animosity with Tina.
When Ron remarried, it was okay, but not really okay. Tina, as well as her family, did not like the new wife, and the situation deteriorated between all of them.
As Ron and Angelica's family grew, Tina's behavior appeared increasingly erratic.
Tina began feeling that Ron was trying to work Tina out of the picture as the mother, and so that had really kind of amplified the rub and the tension.
There was all this crazy fighting, and it was too hard for his daughter. We were just concerned.
This custody hearing was coming up in about 2 or 3 weeks from when this incident happened.
Tina was absolutely the possible person who was involved in this murder. She had all the motive.
Could the custody battle have driven Ron's ex-wife to murder? Investigators bring Tina in for an interview.
One of the things that was most alarming when we sat down with Tina was that there was no remorse, no emotional activity on her part, that she was even concerned that he was dead.
When investigators ask about her relationship with Ron, Tina's answer is surprising.
We knew there were a lot of hostilities, but when Tina was interviewed, she kind of painted that the relationship with them was cordial, it was friendly. It's a red flag for us as investigators because she's already showing signs of deceit.
With suspicions raised, detectives grilled Tina about her whereabouts in the hours leading up to Ron's murder.
She told us the night before the homicide, she had went to work at a local restaurant. She was a bartender. She got off sometime between 11 and midnight. She had went home and sat and watched TV with her mother. Then after that she had went to bed, and at the time of the homicide itself, she had been home asleep.
Before police can press Tina further, the interview is interrupted.
Her mother had hired a lawyer for her.
The attorney made contact with Tina and immediately ended the interview.
Unable to finish questioning Tina, detectives look into her alibi.
Police were able to establish that she had been at work that night till 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Investigators also speak with Tina's mother, Ann Trexler.
She was the grandmotherly type and was helping Tina get back on her feet and help her get through this divorce.
And come across as a very down-to-earth, nice lady, a housewife, and she confirmed that Tina had been at the house with her watching TV.
Though Tina's alibi checks out, police still theorize that she could have hired someone to kill her ex-husband.
We conducted a preliminary investigation into her financial records. Everything was consistent with that of just a working-class individual making normal purchases.
1 week into the investigation with no concrete evidence pointing at Tina, police look for other suspects. They quickly discover Tina wasn't the only one in a dispute with Ron.
Tina had a boyfriend. His name was Adrian Harris, and there had been some confrontations between Ron and Mr. Harris regarding the way Ron was treating Tina. And in fact, at one point, there had been some threats made on Harris's part.
Had Adrian decided to confront Ron, leading to deadly consequences.
As we began looking into Mr. Harris, whether he was paid to do it or whether he did it on his own, we weren't sure, but the concern was that he may have perpetrated this to make good with Tina for the purpose of helping her.
Investigators tracked down Adrian over 900 miles away near Baltimore.
When we talked with Adrian, he did acknowledge that there was some bad blood between the two of them, but he really kind of downplayed the significance.
The day of the murder, he told us he went to work.
He had clocked in before 7:30, and the time of Ron's death was 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives checked travel times between Baltimore and Panama City.
There was not enough time to get to Panama City from several states away to do the murder and go back home.
While Adrian is ruled out, someone close by catches the investigators' attention.
We talked to his roommate, Guy McInvale.
When the officers went to talk to Adrian's roommate, they discovered the description of the killer that Angelica gave to the law enforcement. The roommate fitted quite well.
Guy McInvale had brown eyes, brown hair, and he had a mustache. Now we had another individual that we want to look at.
Once we saw him, Guy fit the description. He was a roommate with Adrian Harris, and we knew that Harris and the victim had some bad blood between them. We thought maybe he went there to kill him.
Is this the break police have been hoping for? Investigators rush to confirm if Guy is a true match for the gunman.
We got pictures of him to show the victim's wife, Angelica. See if he could have been the one that she saw that night.
Back in Panama City, detectives include the picture of Guy into a photo lineup.
Angelica was an essential witness.
She was a witness who can identify the individual that did the crime. Her photographic identification, it was surprising.
It has been 2 weeks since 30-year-old father, Ron Stovall, was shot to death at home in front of his wife, Angelica. Now, detectives hope she can identify the shooter from a photo lineup.
She picked out Guy McIngvale as being the killer.
It was his eyes. There was something very, very similar. What I saw was the same person.
There was an identification of Guy McIngvale that made him a prime suspect.
We have Miss Stovall's positive identification of Guy as the individual that was in front of their house. There's a sense of relief that begins to sweep through the unit because you're finally on to a really developing hot lead. We want to now try to establish what type of physical evidence do we actually have between the victim, Ron, and Guy.
Detectives get a search warrant and race over to Guy's Baltimore residence. They make a telling discovery.
We search his items, and looking at me right square in the face was a pair of shoes consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. So we're moving in the right direction.
Police bring Guy to the local police station for questioning.
Although we still were missing the key pieces of evidence, the guns and such as that, we really felt like we're starting to put together the edges of the puzzle. In speaking with Guy, what he provided us for an alibi was that he was in Maryland working. At the end of work, he went home, slept. The next day he got up, went to work, and so that was his alibi.
Detectives check out Guy's story.
We had an opportunity to speak with Guy at his place of employment, and we were able to collect some video that correlated with his timeline of what he said. There was physically no way possible for him to have been here in Panama City at the time of the crime.
It turned out that what Guy McIngvale said to the police was correct. Guy had an alibi.
Eager to further prove his innocence, Guy volunteers to take a polygraph.
He successfully passed that. So we were able to clear Mr. McIngvale.
For police, it's a disappointing setback.
We were pretty frustrated, and it's a roller coaster. It's one of those, now you're back in the lows again, and the wind was kind of taken out of our sails.
Angelica wanted to help the officers along, but her perception at the time of the event was clouded by the terror, the trauma of the incident itself.
I remember him being the same person. It stuck in my head like that, but I was wrong.
It's difficult when you see something that quick that you can say, okay, this is the individual that did the crime.
We thought we had this thing solved, but you just got to go regroup, see what you still have to do, and you just start from there.
Desperate for new leads, investigators review Ron's autopsy report.
The autopsy confirmed 2 different weapons. They told us that it was a .357 round that he had been shot with, plus the shotgun shell. One big thing we learned was that shotgun residue got in his face. We think that Ron was laying there on the floor, and this guy's saying this is for her, and he presses that shotgun to the back of his head, and Ron's looking at him when that went off.
The forensics report contains another crucial detail that could lead police to the killer.
These were close proximity rounds, and so we knew that this was something personal. And the shotgun shell was paramount. It was a unique round. We would be able to identify it. So that was a plus in our corner.
Detectives shared details of the firearms with local law enforcement, hoping to track down their owner.
We work so closely with the different police departments in the area. We talk to them all the time in case something turns up.
As investigators continue to search for answers, Ron's loved ones struggle with their grief.
The best thing in my life was that life. I didn't think I was strong enough to go through anything Without him, he was always full of life. Losing your soulmate, you can't even explain how much pain that was. It still is. It'll never go away.
3 weeks after Ron's murder, the investigation is threatening to grow cold, but then police receive a tip that reignites the case.
We got a call from the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had a home invasion out there on the beach. During that arrest, they recovered 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun.
They knew from the investigation of the crime scene where Ron Stovall was killed that a shotgun had been used and that a handgun had been used.
That coincides with what we're looking for. We wanted to go over the evidence they had and the circumstances.
Could these be the weapons connected to Ron's murder?
The gentleman that they arrested, we started looking into him and looking at his background and everything. And he had a pretty lengthy criminal history, had actually been linked to some murders in the past. He really caught our attention. This turned out to be a big break.
Police in Panama City are investigating the cold-blooded homicide of husband and father, Ron Stovall. They now believe the missing murder weapons were used in a home invasion robbery, less than 15 miles away.
When meeting with this investigator from the Beach Police Department, what he produced from his crime scene was this: a handgun and a sawed-off shotgun. That coincides with what we're looking for. Then he brings out a shotgun round that is similar to the one that we've recovered from our crime scene. We have everything that meets the parameters. Now we really believe we're on the right path.
The weapons are sent off to the crime lab. While detectives await the results, they dig deeper into this new lead.
At the Beach Police Department, they identified the individual as Tony Alberto Perez. He went by Tony. He had an extensive criminal history. There was some acts of violence in his past, or some drugs in his past. They really felt like he was a pretty violent individual.
Another detail catches their attention.
Tony had brown eyes, brown hair, and facial hair. He looks just like our guy. He met Miss Stovall's physical description to a T.
Investigators head to the nearby jail, where Tony is being held for the home invasion.
He come across as a kind of a likable guy. He was laughing and cutting up, but the more he talked, the more red flags went up. He began bragging about other involvements that he had had with acts of violence. He was completely nonchalant about it.
Detectives turn up the heat and ask Tony if he killed Ron Stovall.
Tony totally denied any involvement, any knowledge of Ron, any knowledge of anything that may have happened on that date, and basically told law enforcement, it's not me, I'm not the person.
Despite Tony's denials, investigators believe he's withholding information, and they obtain a search warrant.
Tony Perez had items that he owned stored at the landlord's house, and we're searching through Tony Perez's items over there. And then we find a pair of work boot type shoes.
While inspecting the footwear, detectives notice a key detail.
Those work boots had what looked like the letter H, 2 H's kind of next to each other on the sole. It looked like what we had found at the crime scene. And we got those sent right off to the lab.
As police hunt for more incriminating evidence against Tony, the ballistic results come back.
And we actually got confirmation from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that the guns collected that Tony had been in possession of matched perfectly ballistically to the rounds that we had recovered from our scene.
That evidence right there is one of the biggest things you could have in any murder case. You can find the weapons and find the person who has the weapons. That's major.
So now that we can put Tony, at least the guns, at the scene, that gave us the ability to change gears with Tony. We had the information and ammunition that we needed to confront Tony about what really happened.
Detectives head back to the jail to interview their prime suspect.
As Tony began to kind of spin his version of what happened to Ron, now he acknowledged having a little knowledge of it, but he said that he had loaned his guns to someone else and that he didn't know what they did with them. He didn't have any involvement in it. But what he says is that he had heard Ron was dealing drugs, and that's why he was killed.
We had already done a thorough background on Ron. We knew Ron was not involved in any drug business. We had talked to too many people. He was a happily married man trying to make it in life. That's what Ron was.
Then Tony gave us information that would kind of put us on some individuals that might be involved, and we tracked those individuals down, and we were able to confirm 100% that they had nothing to do with Ron's death.
People sometimes, when they are being questioned, especially when the police have some of the goods on them, will make up stories. And that's what Perez did. As far as the police could determine, that was a total concoction by Tony Perez.
Detectives believe Tony is lying, but wonder what motive he could have to kill Ron.
We were still kind of struggling to establish how Tony would have came into Ron's life.
Going through Tony's belongings, we found some cell phone bills there, and they were linked to the name of Kim Miller. Kim Miller turned out to be Tony's girlfriend, so we went to talk to Kim.
Kim Miller is the owner of a Panama City hair salon.
Tony and Kimberly, they had been in a romantic relationship for several months.
We were told by Kim that Tony, he was doing odd things for her. He would come around the hair salon and he would actually shampoo customers' hair, clean up, sweep up the shop, things like that.
Investigators look for a connection between Tony and Ron Stovall.
Kim was familiar with the Stovall homicide. She claims that she first heard about it because she had a customer that had called in and canceled her hair appointment, saying how her ex-son-in-law had been murdered.
When detectives ask Kim for the customer's name, they receive a startling response.
The connection kind of came out of nowhere and almost as a surprise.
Kim's client is Ann Trexler, who happens to be Tina's mother. Tina, Ron's ex-wife.
Police believe husband and father Ron Stovall was shot and killed by criminal Tony Perez. They're now exploring a potential link between Tony and Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
When Kim Miller indicated that she styled Tina's mother, Ann Trexler's hair, and law enforcement was pretty stunned by that.
Ann Trexler is the mother of Ron's ex-wife, Tina.
We knew of the ongoing hostilities between Ron and Tina. So when we talked with Kim Miller, we asked her if she had ever met Tina, his ex-wife, and she did met her on a couple of occasions. Tina's mother, Ann, however, was a regular client, was in there on a regular basis.
With Tina previously eliminated from the investigation, detectives asked Kim more about Tina's mother, 52-year-old Ann Trexler.
She told us that Ann's talking to her and telling her about these problems with her daughter going through this custody battle with her ex-husband. And she was upset about it. She's afraid she's going to lose her grandchild.
Ann had told Kimberly the Trexlers had to get a second mortgage on their home to provide legal assistance to Tina.
Could the custody battle be the motive behind Ron's murder?
At that point, we were trying to determine exactly who she was. She hadn't really been on our radar at all. We knew that she was Tina's mom. We knew that she was Tina's alibi at the time of this crime.
Ann Trexler, no criminal history, supposedly a wonderful grandmother and fine Christian lady who would never be involved in something like this.
Investigators contact Ron's wife, Angelica, and learn his custody dispute with Tina brought out a different side to his former mother-in-law.
Apparently they had a good relationship when Tina and them were married, but it was just a constant battle over visitation rights. It was just such a fight with her.
Looking to see if Ann could have anything to do with Ron's murder, detectives bring her in for an interview.
When we talked to her, she stated to us that there was no way that she had anything to do with killing him. She did not want him dead. Matter of fact, she said she loved him. And then Ann Trexler wanted a lawyer. And once they get a lawyer, you're done talking.
So we're kind of getting a heightened sense of concern as far as her involvement in the case, because she decided to basically not cooperate with the investigation.
Having hit a wall with Ann, detectives get a breakthrough when forensics results arrive.
We got confirmation that Tony's boot was consistent with the shoe impression that we had at the scene. Also, Tony had been in possession of the guns used. Now you've got a personal item putting him at the crime scene. At that point, we knew we had our shooter.
That's a big piece of evidence right there.
We were able to go back to Tony and present him with what we knew.
He admitted killing Ron. His very words were, "Okay, I did it." It's the shortest confession to a murder I've ever taken in my career.
Investigators push Tony to reveal how the crime unfolded, and what he tells them is shocking.
Tony told us that Ann Trexler wanted to have her ex-son-in-law killed and was willing to pay to have it done. When we found out Ann Trexler wanted to hire somebody to kill Ron, I mean, this is unbelievable. Ex-mother-in-law gonna get involved and have pay somebody to kill her ex-son-in-law?
He had met Ann at the hair salon. She was complaining about Ron, and that the two of them had worked out a deal for Tony to kill Ron in exchange for about $10,000 to be paid to Tony.
On November 10, 1998, Tony is charged with the first-degree murder of Ron Stovall. But the case is far from over. Detectives turn their attention back to alleged mastermind Ann Trexler. Searching for answers, detectives pull Ann's phone records.
The phone records were a treasure trove of information. They showed a lot of phone traffic between Kim Miller and Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler.
It clearly looks like Kimberly was the middle person between Ann and Tony.
There were phone calls between the Trexler house and Kim Miller at strange hours of the night for strange amounts of time that could not be explained away by saying, "We're setting up our rinse and set." Another thing, we were able to show that Ann Trexler received a phone call from Kim Miller the morning right after Ron's death. So there were links to tie Ann Trexler to this plot, but there was no hard, concrete connection of evidentiary value. We needed something else that would show that Ann, in fact, had hired Antonio Perez to kill Ron Stovall.
Tony Perez, he says that he had come to an agreement with Ann Trexler to kill Ron for $10,000.
Detectives scour Ann's financial records for any signs she had commissioned Ron's murder.
We have withdrawals from her banking accounts that coincide with when Tony says he was paid and the amount that he was paid. So now we have proof that what Tony's telling us is accurate regarding being paid. With regards to Ann, none of us had ever worked a case like this. So it was kind of a shock that all of these pieces were kind of lining up to support she is the motivation to this entire crime.
But we felt like we still could not make the case against Ann Trexler. We needed someone to corroborate what Tony Perez said. We needed somebody else that can draw the line between the money and the murder of Ron Stovall.
We have to go back to the middleman in the case, which is Kim Miller.
She's the whole key to this thing.
She was looking at criminal charges, but without her, we're not going to get Ann. She is the only way that we're going to have true accounts of what happened.
We went and picked up Kim Miller and brought her in.
Kim Miller, she stonewalled. She said, "No, I'm not talking to you. I'm not telling you anything."
Investigators working the Ron Stovall homicide have charged shooter Tony Perez with murder and believe the mastermind is Ron's former mother-in-law, Ann Trexler. But to build an ironclad case, they need Tony's girlfriend and go-between, Kim Miller, to share what she knows. However, Kim is refusing to talk.
It really wasn't until we actually laid out in front of her the phone records and drew the lines between Ann and her and Tony that we were able to convince her to cooperate with the investigation.
We let her know, she was going to be charged with accessory to the murder, and she's facing life in prison.
Prosecutors offer Kim a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against Ann Trexler. Eventually, Kim takes the deal.
Kim sang like a songbird.
Kimberly was very adamant that there was a deep-seated hatred for Ron on Ann Trexler's part.
She indicated that on many occasions, Ann Trexler ranted and raved about Ron Stovall, how bad he was, that he was going to remove her granddaughter. She wished that somebody would take him out, and it got more and more. Finally, Kim said, okay, if you're really serious, I know somebody who might help you.
Kim lets her know that her boyfriend, Tony Perez, will get rid of him for $10,000. And that's how the deal came about.
Kim then reveals how in the early hours of October 6th, Tony drove to the Stovall house to lie in wait for Ron.
About 3 o'clock in the morning, when Ron went out to his vehicle, Tony took a shot at him with a pistol. And Ron ran inside and slammed the door behind him, and Tony Perez fired more shots, which struck Ron in the back.
To finish Ron off, Tony tried to force his way inside the house.
Angelica, she tried to hold the door, and Tony Perez fired a shot that almost struck her. She ran to the other room to call 911.
Tony Perez came in, and he found Ron on the floor and walked up with a shotgun, said, "This is for her." Boom. He killed Ron Stovall right there.
When he made the statement, "This is for her," it's our belief that Tony was doing this on Ann's behalf.
Tony came there to do one thing, and that was to kill Ron Stovall.
Once he had made his getaway, he was able to reach out to Kimberly and make notice to her that, in fact, the job had been done. And then, of course, she notified Ann.
Kim swears Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler, wasn't involved in their murderous plan.
Law enforcement looked at Tina Trexler. Her mother, Ann, may have confided in her, but no one could get to that much evidence to put Tina in the situation of taking Ron's life.
Ann Trexler, she tried to be the grandmotherly type, but she planned this whole thing.
Ann Trexler's thought pattern was Ron Stovall is getting ready to take my only precious granddaughter away from me. And I won't have visitation. And he left my daughter. He married somebody else. He should not be able to get away with this.
From an investigator's perspective, Ann carried just as much weight as Tony. Without Ann, Tony would not have even known who Ron Stovall was.
On February 15th, 2000, Ann Trexler is formally charged with the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
And the cops called and he said, "Got her, she's in jail." She is morbidly evil. The darkest, blackest soul ever. And then she'll put on a face like she's just Miss Innocent. The killer, he didn't know Ron. Ann knew Ron. I do not understand how somebody can have so much hatred in their body, in their mind, in their heart.
In court, shooter Tony Perez pleads guilty and is sentenced to life without parole. In February 2000, Kim Miller is sentenced to 5 years probation as part of her deal with prosecutors. Finally, in 2001, Ann's trial begins, and she pleads not guilty.
Ann Trexler took the stand. She testified about not being involved. She testified about her concerns of her grandchild and the fact that she had absolutely no involvement.
On May 14th, 2001, the jury finds Ann Trexler guilty of first-degree murder. She's sentenced to life in prison without parole.
There's a little peace. I'm in a little peace in this horrible thing. A little justice, I guess.
Gets a little emotional sometimes. It's not just me, You know, we're a whole team working this thing. We celebrated, I'll just say that. We celebrated this.
The most striking thing to me is that these are all ordinary people. And it's a little bit frightening to think that people who are walking around living everyday ordinary lives would be capable of this.
The one that initiated it all was someone that if you passed on the street would look as innocent as they come.
For Ron's family, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
I miss him and I love him so much. My poor daughter, she never got the honor that she deserved. She never got her daddy. We celebrate his life all the time. He loved life. He loved to be happy. And I've tried so hard to keep his memory alive. Very much so. I will never forget how amazing Ron was.
A kind-hearted young woman, beloved by friends and family.
Samantha always had a smile on her face. She loved people, and people loved her, and she loved her cats.
Found bludgeoned and strangled in her own home.
I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
Military people use that knot fairly often. It was a square knot.
Police explore whether her search for love took a deadly turn.
He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless.
She told me he parked in her driveway and just sat there.
He fit that mode of being a stalker.
Until a shocking discovery.
We found that he was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Reveals a killer no one saw coming.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all.
I was in shock.
Frankly, I'd never seen anything quite like this before.
Wichita Falls, Texas, a former oil boomtown that grew into a small city.
Wichita Falls is a town of about 100,000 people, about 130 miles west of Dallas.
It's quiet community. We're very close-knit community.
It does have a small town feel to it. It's not difficult to get to know just about everybody in town.
But the town's sense of security is shattered on the morning of January 6, 2003, when police get a call from a woman who says she's just discovered her friend's lifeless body in the bedroom of her home.
I was a rookie police officer, and we got this call that somebody found a body. And we rushed over to the scene. When he arrived, I remember seeing her friends, and they were very upset.
The frantic couple tell the officer the deceased woman is 28-year-old Samantha Lazark.
At this time, I still don't know what exactly was going on.
I arrived 30 seconds to a minute after the first officer arrived. So when he entered the residence, I was right behind him.
So we weapons draw, and we're clearing through the bottom of the house, the kitchen. We start going up the stairs, and we got down the hallway to her bedroom, and that's when I realized we have a murder.
The victim was kind of in a prone position. I noticed the pool of blood was around her head, and I noticed the cable wrapped around her neck 3 or 4 times.
I'd never seen a female that was murdered like this. This was my first time to actually see that, and that gets to you.
We proceeded to establish a crime scene.
A few minutes later, detectives and forensics arrive.
The victim had a ligature made of coaxial cable tied very tight around her throat. It was a square knot. There's a couple of places you learn knots like that. Military people probably use that knot fairly often. And so it told me that whoever killed Samantha was versed in the knot based on some training.
The cable was not the only weapon used by the killer.
There was a fire extinguisher a few feet away from her that had hair and blood on it. There was definitely blood at the back of her head, a lot of it.
There were some handprint, ridge detail on the fire extinguisher that appeared to be in blood. It looked like there was some fingerprint detail even on the coax. A strangulation death has some up close and personal aspect to it. Based on what we saw, we thought there was a good chance the killer actually knew the victim.
Detectives examined the rest of the room for any other clues.
In the middle of the bed was a laser pointer.
On top of the laser pointer was some blood spatter. So we figured that the pointer had to have been on the bed when the injuries occurred to the victim.
And looking around the house in general, none of the windows were broken and all the doors were intact. Whenever you don't have forcible entry, your first thought is that it's someone that she knows.
Police immediately began the process of interviewing Samantha's neighbors.
One of the neighbors had written down that a car with California tags was at Samantha's home on about January the 1st.
The car from California had been seen 5 days prior, but a different neighbor noticed another suspicious vehicle less than 24 hours before Samantha was found dead.
There was a 12-year-old young man who noticed a motorcycle at Samantha's home. He said it was red and black, and so information about the motorcycle was noted.
Soon, news of the murder reaches Samantha's loved ones.
I just barely got to work when my husband calls and he tells me to come home. And he said that someone had killed Samantha the night before. I went into instant shock. That's just not something you can comprehend. I mean, is this really happening?
I got a phone call from a friend and he told me to turn the news on. And her house was on the news with police tape all around it. I went numb. I fell to the ground. Because, Samantha, why would someone want to hurt her?
Samantha Lazark grew up in the small town of Terrell, Texas, and was the oldest of 3 children.
Samantha had 2 brothers, Joe Jr. and Lance. He was the baby. And Samantha practically raised him when I could work. She was very responsible. She could cook, she could wash clothes, and she loved little kids, and she loved elderly people. She was one of them late bloomers. She didn't really care that much about boys until she met John.
Samantha married her high school sweetheart, John Lazark, at age 20.
John, he went to school to be a refrigerator repairman, and Samantha worked at the grocery store, and her job was real important to her.
I met her when I worked at Albertsons, and Samantha was everyone's favorite cashier. You may be having a bad day, and she just make you happy. She was very high-spirited. She loved her cats. She loved music, and she just loved her tattoos. Everything she had a meaning. She had her fairies on both arms. Then she had one on her chest right here that was for John. It said, "Always in my heart."
A devoted wife, Samantha was blindsided when after 8 years of marriage, John left her for another woman.
She just kept crying to make him happy, and she was so devastated when he left.
Samantha picked herself up, and several months later, she began dating again.
Samantha's confidence definitely changed. I think Samantha was just trying to have fun, get out back into the world, try new things.
Who killed this vibrant and kind young woman, and why? To try to answer these questions, police interviewed the couple who found the body, Lori and Donnie Nieves.
With Lori and Donnie, As they were the last ones in the home before the police arrived, we certainly needed to make sure that there was no information that would tie either one of them to the actual murder.
Detectives start with Lori, who says she and Samantha were co-workers.
Lori described herself as being a good friend of Samantha's, and she said Samantha didn't come to work, which was very unusual. She didn't answer the phone. Donnie had taken Lori to work that morning, and so he came back to get her and take her to Samantha's home to check on her. Lori said they knocked on the door and didn't get an answer, but the door was unlocked, and so they went in and looked around, and they went upstairs and found Samantha deceased.
Investigators speak to Donnie next, and he confirms Lori's statement.
Donnie characterized Samantha as being his wife's friend. He said that he was only there because he gave his wife a ride to go check on Samantha.
Detectives ask the couple if they know anyone who would want to harm Samantha.
Lori pointed her finger at Samantha's estranged husband, John Lazark. Lori said that John was upset with Samantha because she was about to end his health insurance coverage that she'd been paying for, and he had an injury that was going to be very expensive if he didn't have insurance.
Investigators learned that this ongoing conflict had recently escalated.
Lori said Samantha told her in the couple of weeks before the murder. Samantha and John argued about the health insurance, and John told her something to the effect of, "I want to take everything you have away from you." And so that threat certainly raised a red flag for us and made us wonder if John Lazark had anything to do with this murder.
Coming up, police unearth a hidden online world.
Samantha signed up for one of the chat rooms. Her username was Meowmix28.
The information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
I warned her plenty of times. Watch who you're giving your address out to.
And hunt a bold killer with sinister motives.
The fact that he couldn't take no for an answer made us want to figure out exactly who he was.
He pressured her to meet in person, and she said, "What if you're a serial killer?"
There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon.
Until investigators close in on an unlikely suspect.
He looked like a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
One of the most evil human beings.
I was seriously afraid that there would be another victim.
Police are investigating the violent murder of 28-year-old Samantha Lazark. Detectives have learned that Samantha and her estranged husband, John, were in a bitter dispute.
She had threatened to take him off her health insurance policy, and Samantha's friend said he did make a threat at one point.
That made us want to know more about John and the relationship with Samantha.
Investigators learned the marriage had only ended 6 months prior. They asked those close to Samantha about what led to the breakup.
Her best friend was going through a divorce, and Samantha, being the kind-hearted person she was, let her move in.
Samantha noticed that her friend and John seemed to be a lot closer, perhaps, than what she was comfortable with.
Finally, she asked them if they were having an affair, and they said, yeah, they were in love.
I remember how upset she was. I mean, how else could you feel when your husband leaves you for your best friend?
John moved out with his new girlfriend, but remained in Samantha's life.
They were separated, but John would move back in with Samantha. When he kept moving in and out, it was hell, because he wouldn't leave her alone.
Samantha finally told John to move out for good, so she could get on with her life. But John was still dependent on her health insurance.
John, when he's 18, a car fell on him when he was working underneath it and messed up his back. He was really anxious about the insurance.
Investigators bring John into the station.
During the interview with John Lazark, he said that he and Samantha had sorted out the insurance and that she was not going to terminate his health care coverage.
John also denies that he threatened Samantha like her friend claimed. But as he talks, detectives notice a suspicious detail.
He had some small injuries to his hands that we wanted to talk to him about. John explained that he cut his hands while moving a table. The night of the murder, John said that he was with his girlfriend and that she in fact confirmed his alibi. If I were in love with somebody and they killed somebody else, I may lie for them, but there wasn't anything to contradict what he said. We asked John for fingerprints and a sample of his DNA, and he agreed to do that.
Police have nothing concrete to tie John to the murder. But before they let him go, detectives ask who he thinks might want Samantha dead.
John Lazark told us that his estranged wife was online dating.
John said he told her it was risky. He might run into some dangerous people.
Investigators set out to verify John's claim.
We interviewed Samantha's friend, Lisa, and Lisa told us that she knew that Samantha was in fact online dating.
Samantha told me one day that she signed up for one of the chat rooms. It was so new back then. She just made a username and started meeting guys. Her username was Meowmix28. It was her love of cats, and she was 28 years old.
When she started meeting these guys online, I said, "You don't know these people. You're not letting them come to the house, are you?" And I could tell that she didn't want me to know because she knew it was going to upset me really bad.
The computer forensics lab examined Samantha's conversations with people online, making arrangements to meet people that she'd chatted with online.
Investigators compare the messages with details of Samantha's dating life provided by her friends.
Lisa told us that Samantha was dating a man named Chris, and she'd spoken with Samantha the evening of the murder, in fact, and that Chris was at Samantha's home visiting with her.
I did not know Chris. I'd never met him. I know she really liked him and liked hanging out with him. She said Chris was over at her house that evening when she called me. I had bought her the latest season of Friends that was out on DVD, and she said, "We're going to watch Friends. I'll call you tomorrow." And that's the last time I talked to her.
Police determined that the call with Lisa around 6 p.m. was the last contact anyone had with Samantha. She was found dead the following morning, just before 10 a.m.
Because Chris was with Samantha shortly before she died, we really wanted to look at to see who Chris was and where he was.
Investigators search for Chris in Samantha's online chats. However, they find her most recent correspondence, only 2 days before the murder, is with a man who goes by the username I Am Elliot.
I Am Elliot said that he had recently lost his wife, and Samantha said, "Well, I've recently lost my husband to my best friend."
I Am Elliot seemed very sympathetic to her in their messages, and she seemed to respond to that.
We weren't sure who I Am Elliot was.
Her conversations with I Am Elliot had seemed pretty innocent, and there was no association with the name Chris, so the investigation moved on from there.
Detectives dig deeper into Samantha's chats, looking for messages with a darker tone.
So the forensic lab was able to retrieve a chat with somebody initialed KS, and the information on the chat was pretty sexual in nature.
This individual pressured her to meet in person almost immediately, and so that raised red flags about him. He wanted to come over and see her, told her to be blindfolded, topless, and ironically she said, "What if you're a serial killer?" But in the end she went along with it.
Detective suspicion only grows when they realize the chat between KS and Samantha is dated January 1st, just 5 days before the murder.
One of the neighborhood watch people had seen a Mercedes with California license plates on it that had been at her house January 1st.
It had all of the signs that we were on the right track with this guy. So we ran the license plate number, and the tag came back to Christoph Slora.
Could Christoph Slora, KS, be the Chris who was with Samantha just hours before she was found dead?
Samantha's best friend said that the night she was killed, she was with somebody named Chris.
So we said, hey, maybe this is the Chris that we're looking for.
3 days after the murder of Samantha Lazurk, police have linked her online chat to the owner of a car with California plates seen parked at her house just days before she was killed.
The neighbor had written down the license plate number of Christoph Slora's car.
Police believe that Christoph is the man behind the username KS.
When we looked at the online chat between KS and Samantha, they were obviously involved with each other sexually. And as we were looking for a Chris, we were really interested in finding that person.
Samantha did tell her friend that she was hanging out with a guy named Chris the night of her murder.
Alarm bells ring when they dig deeper into their suspect's background.
Christoph was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base here in Wichita Falls.
Christoph wound up being somebody that was in the military. There was a perfect square knot in the ligature that killed Samantha, and I've already thought that somebody perhaps with a military background knew that square knot.
While officers are sent to bring Christoph into the PD, detectives receive Samantha's autopsy report.
The cause of death was strangulation, and that the coax was the means.
The report also shows significant blunt force trauma to the back of Samantha's head.
I think it would be really hard to just strangle somebody with a cable, and I suspect that the fire extinguisher was used to incapacitate Samantha so that she couldn't fight back.
There was no evidence found during the autopsy or any other testing that showed there was any kind of sign of a sexual assault.
Forensic analysis of the murder weapons gives investigators hope that the killer will be identified.
From the lab, we learned that the coax had, and that the fire extinguisher also had DNA from who we believed would be the killer.
The evidence that came back from the lab was very powerful. Fingerprints were on both the weapons, so it's pretty clear that if we could find one person that matched all these pieces of evidence, that we had the person that committed this crime, not just beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt.
Armed with new insights into the murder, police head to the local Air Force base to look for their number one suspect.
When we tracked down Chris Lora, we asked him if he would come in for an interview, and he agreed to do that. He admitted that he had had a sexual relationship with Samantha, but they didn't have a whole lot else in common, and he said he hadn't seen her for some time.
Investigators ask him to explain why witnesses saw his car outside Samantha's home on January 1st, just 5 days before she was killed.
At that point, he denied having anything to do with her death or being over there the day of the murder.
Police want to know where Chris was the night Samantha was killed.
Chris Lora said that he spent the day with some friends at a batting cage and offered up the names of his friends. We followed up that information by interviewing his friends, and they assured us, in fact, Chris Lora had been with them during the day and into the evening that day.
Detectives conclude that Chris Lora was not the Chris that Samantha was with when she called her friend at 6 p.m. But they can't rule him out as the perpetrator, since the exact time of her death is unknown.
Even though his alibi was pretty good, it wasn't airtight. And so Chris Lora provided prints and DNA sample for us.
With no hard evidence against Chris Lora, he's free to go. 4 days after her murder, family and friends gather to lay Samantha to rest.
Samantha's funeral, it was packed. It was full of people that loved her. It was beautiful.
She had a really big funeral. It was just hard. Nobody should have to bury their child. And the way she died was so violent, and I couldn't stand the thought of what actually happened to her. I had to take all of her pictures down for a while. I just couldn't deal with it.
The next day, detectives ask Samantha's friends if they know of any other men she may have been involved with, and receive stunning new information.
Lisa raised the name Donnie Nieves as somebody that she thought that had an affair with Samantha.
Lori and Donnie Nieves were the last ones in the home before the police arrived. They found Samantha deceased. I was surprised because when we interviewed Donnie at the time, Donnie characterized his relationship with Samantha as being his wife's friend. But after the funeral, Samantha's friend Lisa said that Donnie was more than just a friend, that in fact he had been a lover.
Lori was a good friend of Samantha's and also a co-worker, but Samantha told me that Donnie and her had a short, intimate relationship shortly before she was killed. Samantha definitely felt guilty about it.
Once we realized that he had been a lover of Samantha's, we had to look at him more closely.
He had not been forthcoming before about this affair, so it makes you suspicious that this person has something to hide, and maybe what they have to hide is they're involved in the crime. That is a red flag.
It's been 1 week since 28-year-old Samantha Lazark was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in her home. Now, investigators have learned that Samantha had an affair with the man who discovered her body.
When Donnie Nieves was first interviewed, he failed to mention that he had been intimate with Samantha. When we interviewed Donnie again and confronted him with the question, were you lovers with the victim, he admitted that he was, and that it had been a very brief, intense relationship.
Detectives asked Donnie why he didn't tell them about the relationship before.
He said he didn't want his wife to find out about this affair because he knew she wouldn't be happy about it.
Had Donnie killed Samantha to keep her from telling his wife Lori about their affair?
We kept digging into him and seeing if there's anything that would connect him to the murder.
Donnie insists he did not kill Samantha and begs investigators not to tell his wife about his infidelity.
We asked him if he'd give DNA and fingerprints, and he cooperated.
Police let Donnie go, and while they wait for his DNA and fingerprint results, investigators uncover another suspicious exchange with an online suitor in Samantha's chat room history.
His username was Death Metal. Samantha formed a relationship with Death Metal based on their mutual enjoyment of that kind of music.
The messages suggest the pair had been on several dates, but then something changed.
From the correspondence, he thought it was a pretty good relationship. And then all of a sudden, without warning, she just told him she wanted to break it off.
The relationship may have been over, but the man continued to send Samantha messages.
The fact that Death Metal couldn't take no for an answer certainly made us want to look at him pretty close and figure out exactly who he was and interview him.
Had the man been so enraged by the rejection that he murdered Samantha? Police asked Samantha's friend Lisa if she can help identify Death Metal.
Samantha's friend Lisa said it was a guy by the name of Connor Days.
Connor was the one that really got to her, made her nervous. I warned her plenty of times, like meeting people online, watch your back, watch who you're giving your address out to, your phone number. And he was the only one that really stands out in my mind that he scared her.
He just wouldn't stay away. He left notes on her door, even though Samantha told Connor that she didn't want to have anything to do with him any longer. And that kind of freaked her out a little bit.
Samantha told me one day he parked in her driveway and just sat there, and she'd call me and she wouldn't know what to do.
Connor would fit that mode of being a stalker, coming around a lady's house all times of the day or night. And that stalker profile is the one that can lead to someone being a murderer.
Connor looked really good for this, only he wasn't a Chris. But Samantha had dated him shortly before the murder, and we certainly knew that we had to find him.
Investigators track down Connor and bring him in for questioning.
When we interviewed Connor Days, he was pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. He didn't seem to have a lot of interest in the fact that she was dead. And that was either I absolutely didn't do this, or I'm trying to throw you off, and we weren't sure which one it was.
Police asked Connor why he wouldn't leave Samantha alone after she broke off the relationship.
Connor admitted he kept coming back around even though she didn't want to see him any longer. And it wasn't until she pressed the issue that he actually left her alone. And so when asked for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, Connor said that he was home alone and he didn't have anyone else to substantiate that claim. And that's a problem. Connor was asked during the interview to provide a sample of his DNA and prints for us.
With no hard evidence linking Connor to the murder, he is released. 3 weeks have passed since Samantha was found dead, and investigators still haven't found the elusive Chris that was with Samantha the evening she was killed.
There had been an awful lot of work done, and we still hadn't solved the case. There was kind of a frustrated feeling that the person hadn't been caught yet.
As they await news of an arrest, those closest to Samantha struggle with the pain of losing her.
The mental images, imagining her maybe crying out for her mom or her dad or even me, somebody to come help her. It just makes me sick knowing someone could do that. Like one of the most evil human beings.
I couldn't grasp the thought that my daughter was gone and she wasn't coming back.
1 month into the investigation, police are running out of leads. But then they receive the forensic results they hope will blow the case wide open.
When you get information about whose prints and whose DNA is on that coaxial cord that was around the throat, that's just the place where you work to be. There's only one person that could put the DNA and the fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that was the killer.
It's been 1 month since Samantha Lazark was killed, and detectives have just received lab results from evidence found on the murder weapons.
We had all these suspects and were able to obtain possession of DNA samples and fingerprints.
Will the results match John Lazark, Samantha's estranged husband, Donnie Nieves, who had an affair with Samantha and also found her body? Or one of her online suitors, Connor Dace or Christoph Slora?
It did seem like we were on the brink of solving the case, but the results came back and it did exonerate all these people.
Investigators are stunned. The DNA and fingerprints don't belong to any of their suspects, or even anyone in the police database.
We were hoping for the match, and it's a little disheartening when you think maybe you've got something, and then it turns out not to be at all.
I talked to the DA and the lead detective, but I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
It did concern me that Samantha was never going to get the justice that she deserved.
With the investigation back to square one, police review all the evidence and statements they've collected so far in their hunt for Samantha's killer.
While we were looking back through the notes, we remembered that there was a youngster in the neighborhood that said something about a motorcycle having been around the night that Samantha died. So we asked the computer forensics people to look for the keyword motorcycle, and they came back with information that, in fact, I.M. Elliott said that he had a motorcycle.
When detectives previously looked at chats between Samantha and I.M. Elliott, they didn't find any red flags in the correspondence or any indication his name was Chris, so they moved on to other leads.
Our conversations with I.M. Elliott had seemed pretty innocent, and during the correspondence, he told her he worked out at Metro Photo.
Metro Photo was a camera shop in Wichita Falls.
Investigators rushed to the store, hoping to locate their new suspect.
The 12-year-old said the motorcycle is red and black. And we went by the camera shop, and there was a red and black Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It was an aha moment, if you will.
We ran the plates on the motorcycle. We found out it did belong to a person named Christopher Kyle Russell.
The tag came back to Chris Russell, And we said, Chris. Aha. It made it even a bigger aha moment for us. And that's when we decided it was time to know more about Chris. And Chris Russell was enrolled at Midwestern State University here in Wichita Falls, taking some criminal justice classes. He looked like he came from a good home, and he was a decent, clean-cut, all-American kid.
His family was well-to-do, respected members of a large church here in town. His profile was almost too good to be true.
Our first interview with Chris was a trip to Metro Photo, where we went in and asked him to come with us, and he did.
At the station, investigators begin by asking the 21-year-old if he was with Samantha on the night of her murder.
He was polite, but he declined to give an interview. He was asked to give his DNA samples and fingerprints, and he said he needed to talk to a lawyer before he did anything.
Even though it's Chris's right to tell us no, maybe it's because he had something he didn't want us to know. So we served Chris with a search warrant in order to obtain prints and DNA from him.
As detectives wait for results, they continue to look into Chris Russell's past and discover he served in the armed forces.
Chris had in fact been in the Marine Corps, but only for a matter of days. They sent him packing after they got a good look at him. That was a large red flag that the Marine Corps didn't want him.
With Chris looking increasingly suspicious, what detectives discover next is chilling.
In the chat between Chris and Samantha, he said that he had recently lost his wife, and we looked into this and found some, frankly, rather terrifying information.
Investigators learn that Chris lived in the small town of Chadron, Nebraska with his wife Tara, who died only 10 weeks before Samantha's murder.
It was a short time after she had passed away. One night he packed up his belongings and moved back to Wichita Falls from Chadron.
Police contact law enforcement in Nebraska for information about the death of their suspect's wife.
Chris Russell's wife died under circumstances that at first was ruled pneumonia. However, when the autopsy came back and there was noted some bruising on the neck, that tells me that probably wasn't pneumonia. That sounds to me like a strangulation.
But by the time the autopsy information was released, Chris had already had his wife cremated and left the state.
I think the original autopsy didn't go into enough detail for authorities to charge Chris with that murder, and now that she had been cremated, that was never going to happen.
Police fear they have an emerging serial killer on their hands. Detectives obtain a search warrant for Chris's residence.
Chris lived with his parents here in Wichita Falls. While we were executing the search warrant, we noticed in Chris's bedroom a photograph that we thought was Samantha, but that was his deceased wife, Tara. Chris Russell's wife died, and weeks later, Samantha's now dead, and she looks incredibly like Chris Russell's wife.
Police uncover more disturbing clues in Chris Russell's bedroom.
We found a book, and it was a book about knots. And had I not known that there was a square knot around Samantha's neck, I probably wouldn't have looked twice at that book. And we also found some laser pointers.
The laser pointers found in Chris's bedroom were nearly identical to the one found at the crime scene.
There wasn't actually a smoking gun found during that search warrant, but there were certainly bullets to load that gun with.
Investigators seize Chris's computer and confirm that he's the man behind the username I Am Elliot. But as they start reviewing his chat logs, police discover another troubling detail.
We found that Chris, not only was he seeing Samantha, but he was seeing another young lady in Wichita Falls as well.
Fearing that their killer could strike again, police rush to track the woman down.
I was terrified about her. I was seriously afraid that she would be another victim in what looked like a continuing pattern from Chris Russell.
Police investigating the murder of Samantha Lazark have learned that their prime suspect's wife died under suspicious circumstances and believe that his new girlfriend is in grave danger.
I was worried he would do something else again. This nice young lady has no idea what she's involved with. We were certainly worried that she might be another victim in this case.
Detectives locate the woman and inform her that Chris is under investigation.
She was surprised to find that Chris perhaps was involved with a murder here in Wichita Falls. When we interviewed her, she said that Chris had brought her a DVD of Friends to her home and that it was opened when she got it.
Investigators believe it's the same DVD Chris had watched with Samantha on the night of her murder.
Samantha told her friend Lisa that she and Chris had watched that DVD of Friends at her home. But when we searched the crime scene at Samantha's house, the Friends DVD was not there.
With the evidence against Chris growing, police receive his DNA and fingerprint results.
In the end, there was only one person with DNA and fingerprints on the murder weapon, and that would be who killed Samantha, and that was Chris Russell. We arrested him at work. As I recall, he didn't seem surprised we were there at all. In fact, he didn't have anything to say about it.
At trial, prosecutors put forward their theory about how the murder unfolded.
The day of the murder, they were having a nice Sunday afternoon together and went out to her house, and her friend Lisa talked to her on the phone and things were still going good when he was there, evidently.
Maybe Chris brought her a laser pointer so that she could play with her cats. Then something happened that caused him to be angry.
The first thing was a surprise attack from behind because the bruises were all on the back of her head. He knocked her to the floor. At that point, the coaxial cable was in connection with the television set, and he had evidently ripped it out, which indicated a person who was very angry. And she's desperately trying to fight him off. At the same time, he starts looping that coaxial cable around her throat once, twice, and then a third time. And then he ties the knot there, and all the time she's getting weaker as blood is flowing out of her body. Then he strangles the life out of her.
With no confession from Chris, no one knows his motive for murdering Samantha.
You'd always like to know exactly what happened at the Lazark home that night, but something caused him to decide that he was going to kill her that night.
The jury finds Chris Russell guilty, and the judge gives him the maximum sentence of 99 years in prison.
There was an overwhelming sense of relief that we had taken somebody from society and put them someplace where they weren't going to harm anybody. And that's that big, deep sigh you get when you know in your heart that you did a good job. When you look at Chris Russell at first glance, you see a nice, clean-cut young man who was going to college to better himself and who was a regular churchgoer.
He was a very unlikely killer. He didn't fit the profile at all. I guess what we should take away from a case like this is that we need to take caution when we meet people online. You can't be too careful.
An investigation is later opened into the death of Chris Russell's wife, but no charges have been laid. For Samantha's family and friends, the pain of losing her will never go away.
I want my daughter back, which I know it's, not ever going to happen. And she was special. She really was. She loved everybody. And she loved her mama the best. But I don't know what to say. I don't know. We can't get her back.
That day, Chris took my best friend, an amazing person, a person that can never be replaced in your life. I know she's watching down on me. I know she tries to protect me, and Samantha inspired me to definitely not take things for granted and to just live each day, make it the best I can. She's just made me a better person.
vibrant, outgoing woman starting the next chapter in her life.
She's just retired, and she was very much focused on the future. Diane was a person that everyone should meet in life. Positive, happy.
But her life is cut short in a night of immeasurable horror.
There was blood splatter everywhere.
I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
It chills me to the bone.
Police have a complex scene and a long list of suspects.
There was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
There was always drama with boyfriends.
He refused to give DNA. There was something out there that he was hiding. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated?
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
And I was like, what? Oh my God.
No one expected this case to break on something like this.
Union Township, New Jersey. A bustling East Coast community with a small town feel.
Union Township's a mix of mostly suburban, but it's got its downtown area. It's peaceful, it's quaint, it's safe.
But all that changes on a cold November afternoon.
911, where is the emergency? I can't even think of the address right now. Okay, ma'am, listen to me. Take a deep breath. What's going on there? She's not answering. Can you tell me if she's breathing or not? No, she's not. Harry, please. Please, Harry.
After receiving a call from the victim's parents, the Union police responded immediately to the home. The father was across the street with the mom, and they were clearly in shock.
The couple tells police they found their daughter, Diane Zaleski, unresponsive inside.
When I got there, there was massive amounts of blood in the foyer. The walls were covered with blood spray. There was just blood everywhere.
We followed the blood trail into the basement and discovered the victim's body.
She had clearly been dragged to the basement.
You could see her at the bottom of the stairs. She was literally in a pool of blood. There were stab wounds all over her torso, her face, her neck.
There were defensive wounds on her arms and hands. We knew there was a struggle. No doubt. I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
She was partially clothed. There was a pair of black underwear, literally right next to her head.
Had the victim been sexually assaulted as well? Investigators find more disturbing clues.
There were 2 empty containers of solvent by the woman.
It appeared that the body had been cleaned.
So this was an effort to obscure evidence.
The killer also tried to erase their tracks throughout the house.
The kitchen sink was full of soapy water, and inside was the remote controls, some cleaning brushes, and lots of various items that it appeared the suspect had touched.
Also, the garbage can was gone, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of DNA or blood evidence or fingerprints. The entire bathroom area was soaking wet. The shower head was not in its cradle. We thought the killer took a shower, so we pulled the drain to check for DNA.
The crime scene was, how I would describe it, Herculean.
Detectives can't find a murder weapon, but forensics discover what could be a crucial piece of evidence the killer failed to clean up.
There was a droplet of blood on the floor.
It appeared to be foreign to us. It was cast off and inconsistent with the victim's blood.
He had cut himself somehow in the course of the struggle, whether it be from a knife, from punching her.
We knew that the guy was trying to cover himself, but it was minute, and they found it. They saw that blood.
We immediately swabbed that piece of evidence and transported it to our DNA lab.
Detectives get more information from Diane's parents.
They had gone to the house because she was supposed to take a sister-in-law to a doctor's appointment that morning, and nobody could get in touch with her.
They entered her home and they discovered Diane's body.
Her parents were really suffering.
Diane was a born and bred Jersey girl, gregarious and adored by her friends.
Diane, she brought joy to a lot of people's lives. Very positive, happy, laughing, and dancing. Even though she wasn't married and she didn't have children, she was very much focused on her family. Her parents were a little bit older, so she was kind of watching over them. And I knew her brother because he had lived with her for a while.
After 17 years of working as a legal secretary, Diane was now taking time for herself.
Here's this young single woman in her own house, and she's just retired. When she was offered a certain buyout package, there was no hesitation. She was ready. She had worked long and hard in her life. Diane was social. She had her friends from work, and often they'd go to happy hours. Then she had her dance friends. She would go on dates. She would just say, you know, Joanne, in the end, I'm just looking for a guy who can carry in my packages. She still had hope that she was going to meet somebody to spend life with.
As investigators finish processing the crime scene, a theory evolves.
There were no forced entry marks that we could find in the house. He took the time trying to obscure everything. He tried to clean her body. All this took time.
In addition, there was a pot that appeared to have food in it. Maybe Diane had been cooking or had been eating when her killer entered her home, and there was a fork from that pot that we found in the kitchen sink full of cleaning fluid, which led us to believe the suspect had also taken time to eat.
I was involved with at least 150 homicides. I never saw anyone hang out in a house after a murder. I just never heard of it.
We felt it was someone Diane knew.
The killer was very comfortable in this house after the death of the victim.
Which led us down the boyfriend road, or someone who was dating her road.
But what was the killer's motive?
For any human being to do this to another human being is, I don't even have a word for it.
Police rule out robbery since nothing appears to be stolen, including Diane's wallet. And when investigators look through it, they find a clue.
We found a business card.
It belongs to someone named Mark. Who is this man? And could he know anything about Diane's brutal murder?
We found out from her family that he lived in the general area, and it was a bar just up the street from where Diane lived. And we found out that they had been there. So we think that's where she actually got his business card. And because she was out there, she was dating, we wanted to speak to everybody. Maybe he had some information. He came in, and I showed him a picture of her, and he flat out refused to say that he even knew her. He said he had no idea why the card was in her wallet. And then he said, she's not the target I would usually go for. Target?
Coming up, old boyfriends with disturbing pasts.
There was a restraining order in effect.
Play cat and mouse with police.
That wasn't his real name. This guy was ducking us.
When an unexpected tip sparks a race to find the killer.
Oh, he was just a monster.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of Diane Zaleski found a single business card in the victim's wallet. It belongs to a man named Mark. Investigators want to know if he and Diane recently met, and when detectives question him, they become suspicious.
The words that came out of his mouth about targets were very strange. His mannerisms and just the things he said, they were wrong. I don't call girls that I'm going to go out with targets. He had done something, maybe, to other women. He wouldn't tell us anything.
Detectives found a drop of blood at the crime scene that they believe belongs to Diane's killer. Could it be linked to Mark?
He refused to give DNA. Just out and out refused.
It was something that was concerning to us. Someone who's innocent usually is cooperative.
He had taken a bottle of water from us, and when he was finished, he wouldn't throw it out. He left. And he carried his bottle of water with him. So he obviously knew something about DNA. So I followed him. He walked about 2 blocks away from the building, and he threw it.
Detectives collect the bottle and send it in for testing. As news of the murder spreads,
I couldn't believe it. I just was like, oh my God. Oh my God. It was like a bad dream. I just couldn't believe that it was her. It was just so devastating.
Police fan across Diane's neighborhood, hoping someone saw something.
One older neighbor told us that earlier she had seen 2 children playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was. During the winter, she had seen him shoveling Diane's driveway.
Had the neighborhood kids witnessed anything out of the ordinary?
And so detectives wanted to identify those children. And when we spoke with the neighbor across the street from Diane, kind of diagonally, she said she had a daughter and a grandson. So those were the children identified as being outside.
All she could say is, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Her 11-year-old grandson didn't indicate anything else, and boom, the door gets closed and we're done with our canvas there.
But detectives do get information that raises some troubling new questions.
The neighbors told us that her garbage can was outside in the street, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of the garbage. How would he know that if he put the garbage out, it would be gone in the morning?
And why was the killer so desperate to get rid of it?
Was there evidence or fingerprints? We didn't know.
We contacted the local garbage company, and we unfortunately discovered that it was already in the incinerator.
When detectives reviewed Diane's autopsy report, they learned she was killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 the next morning.
The medical examiner determined the cause and manner of death to be homicide and multiple blunt force injuries. The wounds were too numerous to count.
The person that had done this was obviously very violent. Some person who had snapped.
Because the body had been clean. The medical examiner could not determine if there was any signs of sexual assault.
What she had to live through, it's gruesome. It's frightening. I struggle with why. Why did that happen to her? I don't understand that it was just a heinous crime.
A week after Diane's death, investigators get the results from the blood they suspect came from the killer at the scene.
We were able to obtain a DNA profile, and it was male.
We did enter the profile through the DNA data bank, and that came up negative.
So we knew we had the killer, we just didn't know who it was.
Will Mark be a match? Police have to wait another week to find out.
And he was negative.
Because DNA is the only piece of evidence police have to tie the killer to the scene, detectives need to find the match.
It was our goal to locate and interview every male individual that she was friends or romantically involved with and obtain a DNA sample. We discovered that there was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
One of the first contacts detectives talked to is someone named Mike Prunell.
We showed him a picture of Diane. He was like, Mark denied ever knowing her. And okay, take people at their word.
Without anything linking Mike to Diane, detectives don't see any reason to question him further and let him go.
We are interviewing basically anybody and everybody, and we were coming up with nothing. We interviewed girlfriends just to get a feel of Diane, how she was, if she had mentioned guys she might have been dating.
I met the prosecutor, and he wanted to know everything about Diane and what I knew about her. There was always drama with boyfriends. We thought for sure that it was one of those bad boyfriends.
A familiar name comes up, Mike Prunell. But he had told police he didn't know Diane, so detectives do more digging.
You know, checking driver's license histories and criminal histories, and you don't find Mike. We thought it was curious. We wanted to speak to him again, but he never returned a phone call. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Why can't police find any records for Mike? And why did he lie about knowing Diane?
There was something out there that he was hiding.
When detectives asked Diane's brother Ron about Mike, what they hear completely surprises them.
Not only did he know her, but he asked Diane's father for her hand in marriage some 20 years prior. So he knew her real well. Another red flag.
Detectives investigating the murder of Diane Zaleski uncover shocking information about a prior person of interest. A man they interviewed, Mike Prunell, was adamant he didn't know the victim. But Diane's brother Ron tells police that's a lie.
We had found out Mike asked for her hand in marriage. He said Mike had an extensive history with her. He'd known her for at least 20 years. Prior to her move into the new house, she was renting an apartment from him for over a year. But he denied ever knowing her when I showed a picture of her to him.
Police discover more secrets and lies about Mike Prunell.
We found out that wasn't his real name. And when we did find out what it was, we ran his criminal history and we found out that he had domestic violence. And his wife at the time stated that he was beating her severely. He sat on her chest and was just pummeling her face to the point where her eye orbital was broken. So that sent flags off. We were totally convinced this was the guy, because he did beat his former wife. There was a restraining order in effect. And Diane was beaten so badly, this guy was pretty much ducking us. He wouldn't answer phone calls. It took us a little while to find him, but we did. Eventually, got him in again a second time.
But again, Mike won't admit he knows Diane.
He was being less than truthful. It's like, okay, you deny knowing her, you asked her to marry you. It's very suspicious.
He was lying, obviously. We never discovered the reason for that.
Getting nowhere, police take another approach.
We asked where he was, the time of the murder, and he couldn't give us an alibi. And we spoke to him in depth. He didn't give us any answers, nothing concrete.
Detectives can't hold him, but they don't want to let him go before getting one thing.
Eventually, he did consent to DNA. Our hopes are all raised.
We immediately transported it to our lab. We would get the result within 48 hours.
While they wait, Mike is released for the second time, and detectives work to place their suspect at the scene.
We found out that his brother ran a business close to Diane's house. Hopefully there was video evidence there for people that were coming and going. Somebody who worked there might have seen him. We interviewed everybody, but it didn't really drum up anything tangible. And there was absolutely no video surveillance at all. Nothing.
Detectives' next hope lies with the DNA results.
And it was negative. It wasn't a match.
We were feeling frustrated because we knew the killer was still out there. We had his profile. To say this wasn't a mountainous investigation is an understatement. We had to track down and obtain biological samples from close to 100 individuals.
We took swabs from her family members so that we could exclude them. At some point, as being the source of the DNA.
While searching through Diane's computer, forensic analysts discover new information.
We took her computer. There were several different things that we found.
Everything is time-stamped. Hours after Diane's death, there was activity on the PC.
Numerous items, technology items, were attempted to be purchased using Diane's credit card. It was someone that was comfortable having things delivered to Diane's house and it not being out of the ordinary if they were the ones collecting them.
We knew he tried to purchase an Apple computer, an iPhone, and it didn't go through. We had no idea why the purchase itself didn't go through.
We also found that the killer, while in the home, was also searching pornographic websites.
I mean, to go on pornographic websites after you just brutally killed a woman.
Waiting for justice takes a toll on Diane's friends.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated? We watch the news all the time and we see these things, we see murders, but when it happens to somebody you know, it's devastating. It's sad. It made me very sad about humanity. That someone is so capable of doing something so brutal to someone that is so beautiful. Everyone that loved her wanted closure on this.
3 weeks after Diane's murder, detectives get results back from the crime lab that send the investigation in an unexpected direction.
We tested the black underwear found next to the decedent's head. DNA profile was collected. That DNA came back to her brother.
After 54-year-old Diane Zaleski is savagely murdered, detectives discover DNA from the crime scene belongs to someone close to home.
The DNA that was in the pair of underwear lying next to Diane came back to Ron, her brother. A lot of things ran through all of our minds.
We just couldn't believe it.
We thought that there might have been something sexual with her brother, and she had enough. And he killed her. Brutally killed his sister. Diane's brother worked for the Department of Public Works. So he would know when garbage was collected on her street.
The killer knew I can stay until the garbage is removed and then I'm safe to leave.
So there's a possibility that Diane's brother could have done it, collected all the evidence, and taken out the garbage. The killer was there for a long time. Diane's brother, he knew her pattern, her daily pattern. He would be comfortable staying on the scene, making themselves something to eat. I called him up that night and said, "Hey, do you got 10 minutes to come down and talk to me?"
Ron agrees to come in the next day.
How do you say this without accusing the brother of basically having sex with his sister? Because that's what it leads you to believe. I have this report saying that Ron's semen was found in the underwear, so I just put the report on the desk and I slid it over to him and I said, "What do you think?" It's like he was hit by a freight train. The jaw drops. He said, I can't explain it. It can't be true. He went on about the wash and the laundry, that up until just prior to her death, she was doing laundry at her brother's house. I sort of left it at that. I said, we can keep this between us for now. I'll talk to you again in a couple days.
In the interim, Detectives send Ron's DNA to compare with the blood spot found at the scene. They also get some crucial details from Ron's wife.
The wife said he was home with me, he couldn't have done this, he didn't do this. We asked specific pointed questions. She told us they weren't Diane's underwear, they were Ron's wife's underwear. They had the same size and brand of underwear. She did tell us that Diane had been doing laundry in their house. We also found out sperm can be resilient into the wash. So the sperm that was in the underwear could actually be from Diane's brother, and her sister-in-law and her underwear got mixed up. The whole family got by his side. After conducting all the interviews, we all came to the conclusion that he didn't do a thing.
There's hard proof of Ron's innocence when investigators find out his DNA isn't a match for the blood found at the scene.
The case took lots of twists and turns, and there were parts that were shocking to us where we had to kind of sit down and regroup. Diane was also on some dating websites, so we also had to attack that aspect of the case.
Could she have met someone sinister over the internet?
Online dating can be frightening. There are people who are really troubled, and if they come across your path, you are the victim.
Detectives focus on someone who called and texted Diane a lot.
Kyle came to our attention because he was in her phone. And Kyle was very evasive. Didn't want to come in for an interview. He was just a friend. He wasn't romantic with her at all. At least that's what he said.
But was that true? Or did Kyle want more than Diane's friendship?
Her circle of friends said he was a possible person of interest. And we acted on it. We followed up on it. He was not cooperative. We obtained subpoenas to go find them and bring him in for statements.
When he finally did come in for an interview and refused to give a DNA sample, it was too intrusive to him. And he asked a lot of questions. Normally, I'm the guy asking all the questions. So it gets your radar up a little bit that something's not exactly right with this guy. He actually said that he was at the house the week prior to her death, so he was familiar with the house, wanted a relationship with the victim. He denied that. We didn't believe that was true at all. People that I'd spoken to didn't think that he was her type. Maybe she laughed at him and told him to get out. Why else would he be evasive if he wasn't hiding something?
There were no signs of forced entry at all to the home. So Diane must have let this person into her home.
Was that person Kyle?
Maybe he didn't go there with the intent to kill, but maybe something flipped the switch.
Detectives want to know where Kyle was the night of the murder.
He said he works nights, and all the access in the building was key card controlled.
Detectives check logs. There is a record of Kyle swiping in.
But who's to say that somebody else wasn't using his key card? Until we got DNA, we'll just never know.
Investigators tell Kyle if he wants to be ruled out, he needs to cooperate.
We did eventually collect his DNA. He was negative. DNA set him free.
As weeks turn into months, investigators are far from uncovering the identity of Diane's killer.
We're hitting the year anniversary of Diane's death. It was very hard to explain to the family that we were no closer. You saw a family not being able to fully grieve because they didn't know who did this.
It was like a bad dream. I was worried. I said that they should have found someone by this time.
We knew the killer was out there. We were feeling frustrated. He would never be identified. That was our worst fear.
It's been a year since Diane Zaleski was found stabbed to death in her home, and police are no closer to solving her murder. To find her killer, detectives come up with a new strategy.
You usually try to piece together the victim's life, but we felt we needed to come at this from another angle and try to figure out who our suspect was.
Detective Henderson met with the FBI profile unit to identify what type of behavior a person may have done this to Diane.
We talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, and we hashed everything out. Where we went, why we went there, what did this lead, is there anything still open? We went through all the DNA, we went through all the interviews, we went through the whole case. You know, the person trying to buy stuff online, the pornography that was visited, everything. We laid out the whole case.
The profile came back to a loner, a petty thief, possibly, someone with psychological issues, someone that was in her life, but not for a long time.
Age would have been younger. It would have been somebody that was into technology.
We realized that the individuals that we were speaking to did not fit that profile.
To catch the killer, investigators generate new leads.
One of the things was, on the year anniversary, do a media blitz. Local TV, local newspapers.
We just wanted to see whether or not it might stir the pot.
Detectives decide to release new information to the public.
So the things that we included in the press release, whoever killed Diane cleaned up after himself. We also said that we now have the killer's DNA on file. And then we recanvassed everywhere.
After a month, detectives have received a flurry of new tips. And one really grabs their attention.
Detective Rob Henderson received a phone call from an individual out of state indicating that she was on social media with an individual who was concerned about his well-being and his safety because he thought he was being investigated by police because of a serious crime he committed in New Jersey.
She tells me, I'm a stay-at-home mom. You may think I'm a little crazy, but I'm Facebook friends with this guy.
This woman was on Facebook and had met a person years earlier in a Facebook chat room, and then eventually formed a friendship with this person. She explained to us that she had had conversations with him that were troubling to her.
She had said that he had told her that he had committed a murder.
This witness was very concerned for her family, but she said, if he had anything to do with this, I need to speak the truth.
We had been friends for about 3 or 4 years at that time. We used to chat through Instant Messenger all the time. He had a lot of different screen names. He called me his big little sister. He was 9 years younger than me. He told me he lived in New Jersey. He was fluctuating in and out of homelessness. He told me that he sold drugs and things like that, but I didn't feel like that was who he was. I think he was just doing it because he felt like he had to. Out of the blue, he's like, I did the worst thing you can think of. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, like, what is he talking about? I don't know, a drug dealer getting killed. And I was like, what did you do? He said, they found DNA. And so I'm like, what do you mean they found DNA? While I was talking to him, I Googled some articles just to see if anything matched up with the story that he told me. And so I went online and I looked up murder, New Jersey DNA. And instantly an article came up.
She searched and she found the 1-year anniversary article. we put together to try to rekindle some interest in Diane's story.
I was shocked of what I did find. The article says that he tried to purchase an iPad with using her credit cards. The information that they put in the article matched what I knew about my friend. And a light bulb just went off in my head. I know that's him. It had to have been him.
She told us that he had been washing clothing at the home and that how he had literally been in his boxers cleaning.
She told me that he told her that he made himself dinner. Now, we did release certain things in the article about there was some food, but we didn't say he made himself a meal. We didn't provide that information, but he did.
We ended that phone call, and then within a matter of hours, we're booking a flight to visit her and to take some evidence from her. Upon meeting with her and looking at her computer and doing a forensic examination, we knew we had the right guy.
Detectives asked the woman for his name.
Nahshon. That's what he called himself, because he didn't like his first name, Darnell.
She was a little nervous and a little hesitant, but eventually she gave us his full name.
Arnell Yearwood.
The last name gets detectives' attention.
We knew from our canvas that individuals with that same last name lived diagonally across the street from Diane.
When we look back at all the documented reports, it was determined that we had spoke to the killer's mother.
After over a year and a half investigating the grisly murder of Diane Zaleski, police finally get the break they need. They have the name of the suspected killer, Arnell Yearwood. And in a shocking twist, detectives discover his family actually lives on Diane's street, and they've been to the house.
We were there last year after one older neighbor told us that she had seen two kids playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was.
We did some more digging and some more investigation on Yearwood. Arnell Yearwood, although he was in his 20s, he was very small in stature. So he could be mistaken in a puffy jacket for a kid. We knew that Diane had some kids on the block helping shovel snow or do some yard work. It really led us to believe who was described as this kid was the killer. We went back across the street, made it look like we were canvassing other homes, but really we only had one home that we wanted information from, and that was his mother, Mrs. Yearwood. So we went to her home, said, "We know you have a son," and asked specific information about that son. And her daughter, who lived in the home, the mother of that child that was seen on the block, expressed to us that her brother, Arnell, had been at times living in the basement. And it would have been during the time frame of Diane's murder. That her brother sometimes would be outside with her own son.
Arnell's mother insists she has no idea where her 26-year-old son is.
We have to find this guy because we have to do a DNA match.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
A track and trace on Arnell's phone narrows down his position.
Somebody's got eyeballs on the house, and next thing you know, a kid starts walking down the street. Sure enough, it was Arnell Yearwood. And he was 5'1", 120 pounds, soaking wet, wearing winter clothes. Looked like a kid.
No one expected this.
We scooped him up, and we took him back to the office. He was nonchalant. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I was there then.
Detectives push harder, knowing they need to get a DNA sample from Arnell to compare to the crime scene.
He did consent, but after we took his DNA, then he stopped talking. My boss called me at 7 o'clock that night and said, it's him.
On April 7th, 2012, police arrest Arnell Yearwood for the murder of Diane Zaleski.
He was charged and brought back to the homicide task force and questioned again.
This time, Arnell starts talking, and investigators can now piece together what happened the night of Diane's murder.
She let him in based on the fact that he was a neighbor.
He did small chores for Diane. The garbage, minor painting, cleaning around the house. He entered the house to collect money.
Diane looked at him as the nice neighbor kid that she was trying to help. He knocked on her door that night and she let him in because she thought he was harmless. He wanted a romantic relationship and things went bad, and he did not take kindly to being rejected.
She told him to get out, and that's when he said he took a pair of scissors and he started stabbing her. In the entrance right at the front door, that's where the first attack occurred. After he had her down on the ground, he was strangling her. He dragged her down the stairs and left her body dead at the bottom of the stairs. And then he went about his cleanup, and cleanup of him, cleanup of her, and his pornography watching. And at some point, he made himself something to eat.
But why would this kid brutally murder this vivacious woman?
The killer never talked about a motive, ever. And to prove a murder, you don't have to prove motive. We never identified what a motive was.
Whatever it was that caused him to act the way he did, so viciously, it will never be explained.
In court, Arnell Yearwood pleads guilty to the murder of Diane Zaleski. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Oh, he was just a monster. I was disappointed, but I guess that's the maximum you can get. At least there was some accountability, because she deserved that. Her family deserved that.
The family made up black bracelets with white lettering that said Justice for Diane, November 18th, 2010, which was the date she was murdered. And I wore that bracelet up until the day he pled guilty in court and went to jail. 2.5 years I wore that, and I didn't take it off.
Losing Diane is like a moment in life, like before Diane and after Diane. It's been quite a few years since she's gone, but I do still miss her. Her heart is still with me. She was so real and very kind, and she was funny. And every once in a while, I could feel her. I could feel her presence. And